who was it that talked about? It was Kathy. Angela Davis, when she was in Germany. I don't know whether Sue and Lou, you know this. Angela was doing a PhD in Germany.
In Frankfurt, no?
In Frankfurt, yes, under Theodore Adorno. And I think she only completed her master's degree because she wanted to come back to the United States because of the struggle. But she had a class where they were reading, I think, Hegel and Kant, probably. And that was really the thing back then in the 60s in Germany. It seems that it's not so much the case today. And in fact, you know the guy Dane from University of Chicago?
Thomas, yeah.
He just graduated from University of Chicago with a degree in philosophy. And he told me that a lot of German students come to the United States to study Kant and Hegel and come to the University of Chicago because it's felt that it's more seriously studied here. I find that very interesting, but not unusual. And actually, I would say that the University of Chicago would be the place for the reason that Harold Bloom was there, and the University of Chicago, even in its formative times, was always a great books place. And I think that still continues. I don't know it to be completely true. But Angela and Kathy brought this out in her autobiography, said that in this course, that in her course they only got up to 20 pages of the introduction, and we've already made it past 30. So Kathy said, well, we're not that far behind. And Hegel is not an easy read by any means, and so on. But, so we're going to get back into the introduction, but also we want to talk about a few other things. One, the murders in Buffalo. We want to talk about the Kendrick Lamar album, a CD that was just released. And we want to just have an update on the Azadi Reading Group and what's happening with the year of Indian independence. And maybe, are we ready to give a report on the 10th anniversary? You want to say something? Okay, we'll say something about that too. And then that'll give us at least an hour and a half, if not more, to read the introduction. By the way, I think we have a very serious grasp of what Hegel is doing, although we don't know all of the ins and outs, and it is a complicated work because, like anything, he's addressing his contemporaries as he is putting forward his own system. So I don't think we should feel in any way that we have not made some serious, how would you say, serious advances. And I think the fact that we know philosophy better than we did, and we take philosophy seriously, and we see its connection to science, to Du Bois, and that'll get us to the year, the 10th anniversary. Where you going to church? You look really nice. Excuse my being distracted. It's very nice, man.
Thank you.
Yeah. May her bless. As they say, you're welcome.
May her bless.
Okay,
You made him worse.
The 10 people that were killed last Saturday.
Right.
I know after Free School, I heard this on the news, and I just couldn't immediately make sense of it. What? So it turns out this young white guy went into a supermarket where he knew there would be a lot of black people in Buffalo's black community, and using an AR-15 systematically and deliberately killed as many people as he could. Yeah, these 10 people, as was the case with the 9 worshipers at Mother, I think it's Mother AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. This happened about 6 years ago. And these are martyrs, and we have to see them that way in this struggle. Clearly, the young man that carried it out is mentally ill. I don't think we can in any way diminish that there is, and this is not unusual, it's widespread in this society, with people who feel threatened by everybody, and often if somebody says on the internet, well, blacks are trying to replace you, or blacks this or blacks that, they take that in, and thus blacks become the visible enemy. In India it's what they call communal violence, but in the larger sense, this is a society tearing itself apart. And as I tried to find an explanation, I went always going back to Martin Luther King Jr., who understands tragedy and suffering perhaps better than any public figure in American history. And I was thinking about his sermon at the funeral for the 4 girls killed in the Birmingham church bombing in 1963. And King would always seek out the ways for healing and to bring people together. This is very important that we not, and I think we're all, none of us here will do this, we cannot adopt the political line of the ruling elite in the Democratic Party, because for them this is but an opportunity to advance a politic. Let me kind of explain how they calculate it. It's very calculated. You could see it with the release of the Supreme Court draft on Roe v. Wade. You could see it in this instance. And each time Biden becomes the symbol of resistance. Imagine that. Biden as the representative of resistance. What they're trying, and what they set up, is this narrative that black people are under attack by white racists. And we, the Democratic Party, are protecting you from the racists. Therefore, when it comes time to vote, vote for us, because we're your only defense against a racist onslaught, represented, of course, by Donald Trump and the Republican Party. This, of course, as everybody here knows, is so disingenuous and such a lie and such a fraud. And it's all drama and political theater. What is exposed if we compare Martin Luther King and Joe Biden's approach, or the Democratic Party's approach? And it could be Joe Biden, it could be Kamala Harris, it could be any of the Democrats in the Congress. It's the same thing, because it's all politics, it's all a political calculation. The Democratic Party does not want to heal the nation. Martin Luther King, I don't know, the bombing of that church carried a kind of sadness and trauma across the black community and beyond, even more than this, because there is nobody to stand up and explain this, and so on. Martin Luther King called for healing the nation and moving forward, and what this meant, and who is responsible for it. And he never said that all white people are responsible for this. Frankly, there are two diametrically opposed theories of race at work here. The woke theory of race, that we're all being fed all the time as progressive and so on, and Martin Luther King's theory of race, that racial differences or differences themselves should not prevent the people from uniting for progress, for change. Well, this was Gandhi. This is the Gandhian heritage, a contribution to the civil rights movement. Ahimsa, and that was King, but not Biden. Two different approaches, radically different. And so the question is, why one, the King approach, and why Biden's approach? And I think it's obvious from what we're saying. This is a huge tragedy. The nation is not treating it as a tragedy. It was a one-day affair. Now let's get back to the business of war. You see what I'm saying? It's not, there's no reflection. And of course, this also exposes what the so-called Black Lives Matter of 2020 was all about. If tens of millions of people, we're told by the New York Times, can march because one man was killed, and why isn't there one march when 10 people are killed?
Right.
Black Lives Matter is nowhere to be found, which means that the Black Lives Matter was a wing of the Democratic Party and of the establishment, no matter what people thought. And this is the cynicism of it all, that the ruling class, the attempt at regime stabilization, and that's what the 2020 election was about, regime stabilization, to take back the government from the disruptors, the Trump people and others. And so they knew from Hillary's election in 2016 that they could not win using the normal means of elections and political parties, that they needed this vast movement which could claim a moral, that it was a moral campaign, and that Biden was supporting a moral movement like the civil rights movement. I know I keep saying this over and over again when I talk to y'all. this, well, I'm not going to say it again. That was not, could not be a civil rights movement. One, you didn't know who the leaders were. Mm-hmm. Number two, you never found out where the money came from. And number three, you have to ask the question, why did it end a month and a half before the election? You know, so you're done what you did, you know, you understand my point. But this is a deep tragedy. It is one of those tragedies that if it is not grieved properly, and it will not be, if the nation and the elite kick this issue, the can down the street, it will only make the, as they say, reckoning even more difficult when it is reckoned. Because people want to know what caused this, who are these people. Just don't tell me, well, this is replacement theory. Well, what is replacement theory and who is behind it? Right. You know, let's talk about it. You know, and well, you get the point. But I think, contrary to Joe Biden and the Democrats, and believe me, all of this is about regime stabilization. To stabilize the regime by any means possible. And to then, of course, corral what is called the left, inverted commas, you know, to the side of the Democratic Party. You know, Emily and I talk about this quite a bit because she works in a union, and that kind of fake trade unionism, and we have to call it out, that has nothing in common with the type of trade unionism of a Martin Luther King. And nothing in common with it. Martin Luther King was talking about organizing the unorganized. These people are not talking about that. They're talking about, quote, get out the vote for their chosen candidates. But one thing I would say, and I hold to this, I've been saying this, and I don't know if everybody would agree with me. The nation is less racist today than it was 50 years ago. White America, not there. Well, I'll put parentheses, Black America ain't all the way there. Believe me. White America, while not where the nation has to be, is not where it was 50 years ago. The nation is less racist. Now, what that means has to be interpreted, because if it is less racist, then you will proceed in a way differently than if you thought the nation is more racist. Mm-hmm. He says, take for example, settler colonialist theory. The assumption of settler colonialist theory in the 1619 Project is that the nation is more racist today than it was 50 years ago. Matter of fact, their claim is that the nation, the races are not just racist, but now they are fascists and Nazis. Right. So we're closer to Nazism, kicking at the door, kind of represented by the January 6th thing. And this is all a ruling class narrative. And it's so fake. The nation, yes, the ruling class is probably more fascist and authoritarian today than they were 50 years ago. There was more freedom of speech even under McCarthyism and the Cold War than today. Which, I guess when we talk about Kendrick, Lamar and so on, that'll play into it. This control of all of the instruments of thought, of speech, of knowledge,
Right.
is unprecedented. The prison industrial complex, the national security state, this huge set of institutions designed to monitor and to disrupt people's movements. The news media. I mean, the New York Times today, compared to 40, 50 years ago, this is a fraud. It's not even a good journalism anymore. Even when you had 3 stations, not with all of this 24/7 cable and stuff, you got better news. That didn't mean you still needed Muhammad Speaks to really know what was going on in the People's World or the Daily World. You needed these The Guardian, you needed these alternative sources. But from the standpoint of the ruling class, this is a far more authoritarian, if you want to call it fascist. I mean, even Goebbels and Hitler could never have imagined this type of control. You see what I'm saying? So this is, from the standpoint of the ruling class, fighting to hold on to power, to stabilize the regime, as it were. They will go to any lengths. Now, but the country is less racist. It's not where it must be, but it's not what it was. And it's not more racist than it was. It's less so. These things have been measured by social scientists, sociologists over decades. And that's what the social research shows. Just anecdotally, if you went back 50 years ago, there was a sharp divide between white music and black music. Of course, there's still a difference, but white music is more like black music than it's ever been. White people, even I think sometimes more than black people, want to go back and, white musicians. I mean, really, I was listening to this Colorado Jazz Repertory Orchestra. It's worth listening to. It's a big band. I don't know if anybody, big band. By big band, I mean 4 trumpets, 4 or 5 trombones, 5 saxophonists, then pianos and keyboards. And I mean, that's a big band. That's a lot of sound, man. And who are they playing? Earth, Wind, and Fire. Stevie Wonder. You know what I'm saying? And this recognition of the great achievement of black music and black art, that wasn't the case some years ago. The fact that even the ruling classes had to concede to more black images in movies, I'm not happy with all of it. But white people are not in a knee-jerk way rejecting black images, black music, and so on. Okay, so this means that the possibilities of united struggle, especially in this crisis, and especially this economic crisis. And, they keep saying inflation went down by 0.2%. It's now 8.3% over last year. But don't try to buy gas or milk, and don't try to get baby formula. This is where the economy meets the average person. This type of crisis has huge political consequences because it will unite people. And it is uniting people. Whatever your race is, when you drive up to the gas pump and you have to pay $5 or $6. Hey,
It costs $5.
the anger is the same. And people, I think, more than any other time, recognize a ruling class. See, when they attack Biden, and this is the thing, Biden was the candidate of a united ruling class.
Mm-hmm.
This, I've mentioned this, but Chris Hedges is wrong as he can be. He don't know what he's talking about. This is why, sometimes these cats need to take a little vacation, because they talk too much.
Paid vacation.
Huh?
They need a paid vacation.
A paid vacation. Yeah, something, because, they're trying to find a way to rationalize their support of Biden. Or we're supporting the less fascist wing of the ruling class. No, you're not. You're supporting the ruling class itself. The ruling class was more united in the 2020 election and are still more united than ever before. And how do you measure these things? Well, you see who's who in these ruling class movements, in these political campaigns. The other thing, look at who was supporting the war in Iraq. It's almost unanimous among the ruling class. But at the same time, the ruling class and the people are more separated. And that's across the board. I'm reminded of the election last Tuesday here in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
There were some wards that had 3% turnout. In other words, 97% of the people didn't even turn out. I think the overall turnout was about 19%. But that doesn't tell the whole story. Is this huge refusal to take part in a system that does not serve them. And people know it. People know it. And this unifying of the working class, and it's not rocket science. I mean, you just look at, you go to Butler, Pennsylvania, and you look at them and then come to Broad and Erie and say, hey, looks about the same. I mean, to me, and the people act about the same.
Yes.
So the conditions for struggle are greater now than any time that I can remember. The other thing is that the American people are more anti-war than even during the height of the anti-Vietnam War struggle. Now, isn't that something? If you just went off the top, basic assumption, the anti-Vietnam War movement was the greatest anti-war movement in our history and so on and so forth. I would say that's not the case. This is the greatest anti-war pushback probably in the history of the country. Let's not get it confused. The United States is at war. Proxy war using the Ukrainians, but the US is at war. It's a dangerous situation, very dangerous, because the US is saying we ain't gonna lose again. And this is a regime change war against Russia. This is horrible.
Definitely.
But the American, let's take, in that bill, for $40 billion, which will take the total up to something like $56 billion in 2 months to Ukraine. 57 congressmen in the House of Representatives voted against it. They were all Republicans, and 11 senators did. whatever their reasons, because everybody said, well, they did this because it's anti-Biden, yada, yada, yada. Okay. Whatever the reason, objectively it constitutes a vote against war, or at least a vote against funding war. And as the government moves to increase the funding, and they will, because they can't lose, that number might increase. If it gets to the point of sending troops or, quote, advisors into Ukraine, the opposition might even grow stronger. We cannot be blind to this. So my point is great dangers. I mean, during Vietnam, there was no threat of a confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union, or the United States and China over Vietnam. That was not on the table, you know. But this one, there's a possibility. And the other thing is, you know, Biden is now in Asia, you know, under the guise of containing China. And, you know, I'm just trying to figure out, now how do you do that? How do you going to contain China, the second largest economy in the world, probably the second most powerful military in the world? You know, so what is that going to take? And, well, you get the point. I guess I'll just end on this point. I guess what we have to say, this is a ruling class completely out of control.
Definitely.
You know what I'm saying? And the people must speak. And we cannot be distracted. So I'll just stop there. Maybe some people want to say certain things. We're not on the cusp of race war. That, you know, there's no indication of it. And you know, I kind of get my reading of black folk, how they sense things, horrified and outraged at this kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, really.
Yeah.
But they have not decided that now we have to do to them what they just did to us. No one says that. You know, and you know, the history, black history, is always this kind of seeking healing. That's rooted in black Christianity. Seek healing, you know, seek a way out of this tragedy. That's just the way black folk think. Now, that's not every black person, but generally, that's the way black people approach these things. Always have, you know. So I'll stop there.
Thank God. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, please.
Thank God that King had spoke to, you know, all these different generations, and for me, it's still resounding that we're not reacting to the horror, but we've been pulverized with all the horror, and they won't address that, but and they can't address it without even mentioning King, not King, but his living message. Not he died and he's not. We're not aware of his thoughts and his feelings, and so as with Gandhi, but so as with a lot of world people that concerned about young people, you know, not going out having a suicidal path.
Right. That's right. Go ahead, Joe.
Oh yeah. So I was looking at Biden's trip to Asia. I didn't know about that. But apparently he's going to, I guess, South Korea, Japan, and meeting with a bunch of leaders, like you're saying. But what I wanted to say was, firstly about this Buffalo massacre. I saw on social media, although I haven't confirmed it myself, that, and so others correct me if they have more information, but that the shooter had been, I think he had worn or been associated with symbols that are part of the Azov battalion in Ukraine.
Oh, really?
The Azov battalion is like the neo-Nazi battalion in Ukraine. That's the U.S. is funding. That's killing. Do you know about that?
Well, yeah, there's photographs of the shooter with the black sun insignia, which is, I think, a broad Nazi symbol, but it's one that is also featured in the Azov symbolism and stuff.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I mean, it's a possibility. Some were maybe speculating that because we've seen this pattern before, particularly like with the war on terror. You see the U.S. for a long time developed and funded all these like Islamic fundamentalist groups to destabilize governments in the third world. And then there's what the CIA would call quote unquote blowback, where those same groups would do attacks within the United States, and then that would be justifications for war, but also for like cracking down on citizens' rights and so on, and justifying a foreign and domestic war on terror. And some are arguing maybe there's parallels with this thing of arguing we're now facing a white nationalist domestic war on white terror, quote unquote.
Right.
So I mean that's something that you can't discount at least, but I guess we'll have more information on that later. But the other thing is on this point of so you were saying that you feel that U.S. society, particularly white America, I'm assuming you're also saying, is less racist now than it was 50, 60 years ago during the civil rights era. And so what I was thinking as you're saying that is, should we differentiate between American society, American people being less racist versus the U.S. state,
Absolutely.
U.S. elite and the state which they control, perhaps being as racist or more racist than it was back then. And so I think that it would be an important distinction. And of course, there's a lot of reasons one could argue for that. All the things we see, like the problems facing Black America, some argue are greater, but that's explained not by the average white person being more racist, but the state structure being more racist and the elite. And then it also brings us to what you were saying about free speech and freedom of thought and so on. I actually agree. One of the things which was kind of crazy was this whole, I was talking to Roger the other day about how in the U.S. right now, if you look at the kind of elite debate about foreign policy, like thinking about the Ukraine war, one of the people who are arguing for a more dovish, like realist position is Kissinger. Of all people. So what does it tell you that Kissinger is more dovish? This sounds crazy saying, quote unquote, more to the left of the current people in power, the woke elites, right, who claim to be woke and anti-racist, are more reactionary, more extremist, more warmongering, perhaps than even a person like Kissinger, who at least believed in nuclear détente and that sort of thing, diplomacy with Russia, and yet they're hiding behind this guise of wokeism, anti-racism. So I mean that's such a crazy, it's a crazy thing to imagine. I mean we have to keep that into context. And
can I just say one thing? I think ideologically, the group, the state, the state is more reactionary than it was when Kissinger was a major player in the state, and you could almost attribute it to the ideological forces that have seized the state, and we usually refer to them as neocons. And so when you take a guy like a Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, or Blinken, Secretary of State, they come out of those think tanks and those universities where they were socialized and politically oriented or politically directed towards this neocon world hegemony.
Despite the fact that they're supposed to be the liberals,
Absolutely.
neoliberals, right?
Absolutely.
But I think also that they
And I think the thing that kind of exposes them, they all trace back to Hillary Clinton.
right.
And that cabal.
But the previous leadership of the state, like in the 70s and 80s and stuff, they didn't, even I guess up to the Bush administration, they didn't have this, they didn't try to give this layering of being woke, being anti-racist,
No.
which makes this whole thing even more sinister and cynical.
Sinister, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There's no question. And it makes it difficult for the people to make sense of
Right,
it.
exactly.
And especially when you can be left
Right.
and still support the war in Ukraine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just to add, part of the confounding nature of like the massacre, but then its connections to Ukraine is, the manifesto of the Buffalo shooter was directly inspired and also plagiarized from the manifesto of a mass shooter in New Zealand a few years ago.
Christchurch.
Yeah, Christchurch, who shot up a bunch of Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
But that shooter in New Zealand was, I think he like traveled to Ukraine and trained and learned from the Azov guys.
Wow.
And even what's so incredible about all of this is that, the media a few years ago in the West, they were directly labeling Azov as a neo-Nazi terrorist group. Because it wasn't, like Ukraine and Russia wasn't directly in the sides of, this whole conflict. But now it's like they basically memory wiped like the population and be like, we never said that. And now they're praising the Azov guys as like the heroes of Ukrainian resistance. And it's just, it's like to what you're saying. It's like, how are people supposed to make sense of this when you're constantly being bombarded with like basically so much lies and so many falsehoods and so many misdirections and flips and kind of, it's hard to make sense of the reality of these things. And people don't, and it's very clear that they don't want to draw any connection between the Buffalo shooter being inspired by the same ideological movement as basically what is the heart of the Ukrainian resistance to Russia.
What is the Azov? What do they talk about?
Uh,
What's their ideology? If I might.
Talks about Hitler.
They're the ideological and maybe even physical descendants of the Ukrainians who were pro-Nazi in World War II.
Like
And their heroes are, the people who wanted to genocide Russians, even Jews and so on.
That's crazy.
Oh, Anna.
Oh no, I was gonna say to an earlier point that well, I heard that I think a lot of this realist, you could say rhetoric, that guided foreign policy, especially during the Iraq War and all that.
John Mearsheimer.
Yeah, well, I heard that sort of went out of vogue because of the eventual admission from Powell that the WMDs were falsified and made up, and the New York Times was the major mouthpiece of that lie. But the thing is that I heard, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but that the Democratic establishment actually used that mass disillusionment and the anti-war movement to hijack foreign policy and basically shift the strategy to a more idealist rhetoric, using the language of human rights. And they use the UN Security Council to pass this whole responsibility to protect doctrine, which I think was first used during the NATO invasion and bombing of Libya. And then they extended that policy to Syria, same thing, using the language of human rights. And then they created all these, they either created or bolstered already existing state-sponsored NGOs, the Human Rights, what's it called? The Human Rights.
Human Rights Watch.
The Human Rights Watch. Or same thing, they would bolster Amnesty International, all those kinds of things. So that now warmongering and hawkish foreign policy is effectively associated now with human rights and protecting sovereignty and all these kinds of things. And I guess the other thing with the Buffalo shooter and the ideological connections to Azov and also the Christchurch shooter in New Zealand. I mean, I've been seeing a lot of coverage, not from the mainstream media, but from like individual bloggers and whatnot about that. I guess the thing is that I've been seeing a lot of conspiracy theories that, or I don't know if you want to call them that, but saying that like he was a Fed, or that he was planted, you know, because like people do connect these threads, but then I guess like my thing with a lot of conspiracy theories is that I think a lot of them like take the easy way out in that it's you can sort of like go to blame everything on like a certain cabal or a certain you know, whatever you want it to be, instead of actually looking at like what are like the ideological forces that permeate through society, how do they manifest, especially in like disaffected and alienated Western men.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know, but I've been seeing a lot of like, again, like you could call them conspiracy theories about that, you know, talking about he could potentially be a Fed. People are like revisiting Pizzagate and like all of these, you know, I think. Every time something like this comes up, like I feel like I see like people start to go back to posting about other, you'd say like, yeah, conspiracy theories that have to do with like the ruling elite.
Yeah, well, the ruling elite puts conspiracy theories out there.
Okay.
You know, so they could be responsible for the conspiracy theory that is blaming them.
Yeah.
You know, to create confusion. Go ahead, Emily, and then.
I think your like introductory remarks were really clarifying in terms of that this was a horrible tragedy, but when people are not able or given the opportunity to actually grieve and understand what's happening, but instead you have the real cabal or conspiracy of the New York Times, Time Magazine, literally releasing articles that are trying to use this tragedy for its own gain. Like the Time literally has an article that says what the Buffalo tragedy has to do with the effort to overturn Roe. You know, like you're weaponizing a real tragedy where lives were lost to try to basically what you're saying, Doc, which is like in a moment like this, it becomes imperative for people and us to not take the line of the ruling class because that is what they want. They're connecting with Time Magazine, New York Times, the ruling elite media organizations. Like they want you to connect the Buffalo tragedy to Roe v. Wade to basically say white people are backwards. Like the Trump supporters are backwards. Because like you're saying, Doc, in this moment, there is a real opportunity for there to be like the people have never been more united, have never had more issues to be united around war, around like the economy, the fact that they cannot find baby formula, the fact that they cannot pay their gas and get to work. And you need to find ways now to actually, like, it's a desperate attempt to disunite people who are inevitably uniting in this crisis. And I feel like it reminded me of the article you wrote, Doc, about Lenin and Du Bois and what they show about the backwards people. And I think it's related to also like, and I think that is why people like, you know, Lenin and Du Bois matter a lot in this time when there is such a control of even the way people think, a control of knowledge, a control of speech. It was astounding. Like Alice and I were talking about the fact that the Time Magazine literally is trying to weaponize this tragedy and say like, oh, it's connected to Roe v. Wade. Like, you know, like it's time for like there's a race war happening. There's a war between like the backwards whites and like everyone else, the woke.
And you know, if I could just say, to prevent black people from the natural progression of leaving the Democratic Party and to prevent women from leaving the Democratic Party. You know.
And that's also why you need, I mean, we'll get into it later, but that's also why you also need to not just do this part of the ideological work or like why the New York Times is not just saying like, oh, there's a race war happening, but then at the same time, why the New York Times and other media outlets are now promoting Kendrick Lamar. Now you need to define, okay, what is black leadership? What is the black proletariat? Oh, Kendrick Lamar.
The New York Times. Let me let Emil come in because we're going to transition right to Kendrick Lamar in a minute and his recent album.
Well, I like the way you started this conversation, Tony, about giving, a human understanding of the dimensions of what went on here. Giving the humanity of the people both who were killed and the humanity of the one who ultimately did the tragic act. And it just makes me think of how the reverse is the case of, the media that we are given is very dehumanizing of every possible actor in the surrounding the event and both within the event. And I just, I think about how this idea of racism, which I think, ruins lives, externally and internally, and creates this impetus or this moment to become very, or to treat other people as if they weren't human. And I think of how the system's ability to adapt. I mean, the reason it's still around is it's very good at adapting the dimensions of how to divide and get people who would normally be very well united to see each other as the enemy. And I think also, we consider the media and these ruling figures as very unreliable in the way they portray things, but I think it's actually, they are very reliable in actually communicating what they actually do believe, both themselves and the other. I mean, when I think of
what they want us to believe,
right.
too.
When Hillary Clinton considers half of the country a basket of deplorables in that term, I think of in the Bible where it says you will know the fullness of one's heart by how they speak, by the words that they use to describe one another. And just thinking about Nancy Pelosi, I can't remember what verse she was trying to use, but she was quoting from the Bible in Congress when she was trying to explain the rationale for why we need to send missiles to Ukraine. And it just makes me think of how Jesus would talk about the Pharisees and the scribes of his time and how they would put the 10 Commandments, a tablet, on their forehead. Yeah. Because, God in the Bible says you need to keep these ideas at the forefront of your mind. Completely missing exactly what it is it's actually being communicated there. I agree with you that we are seeing a consciousness, a rising consciousness of people in this country. And they certainly are tired of war. That question that seems very clear. However, as far as organization goes, I don't think we can say that they're more organized than they were before. Even if the potential is much higher than it was. I mean,
maybe can I just?
Yeah, sure.
That's a very interesting question. Having been a part of the anti-Vietnam War movement, it was not a highly organized movement. I think in some ways, because the roots of this anti-war sentiment is in communities, working class communities, disenfranchised. I think it gives it an organic organization that I don't think we had during the war in Vietnam. I really don't. But
I wasn't there, so I can't say for sure. But I know that
I was there. I still can't say.
Right. There just was moments of massive amount of people getting together. Although that doesn't mean everything. Obviously, we talked about the BLM.
There was a lot of factories. There's a lot of factories where I lived at, and where I might have worked in Roxborough, in the neighborhood where I lived at. I worked in a factory where we made emblems. It was called Penalty. So it was a lot of young people, and the same thing. It was like it was something about the unions, and you would be a part of the union. Longshoremen, like your dad, longshoremen. I worked at the waterfront too. But it's a lot of communities had a lot of factories in their neighborhoods. I'm telling you, Kensington, Frankfurt, and South. It's a lot of industrialists, and a lot of young people. We all went to industrialized training vocational schools, so that organization from the mother and the father going to work and making people work. They used to make sweaters on Lehigh Avenue. Okay, they had a lot of mills, textile stuff. Philadelphia was a pretty elaborate city. And, not to change this conversation, this is the heartbeat, the Church of the Advocate of this movement that's growing and developing exponentially while we sitting here, because this would be the consciousness. Like the founders of the whole nation was sitting in Philadelphia 10, 20 blocks from here. It's something to situate ourselves again.
I think Emil's making a hell of a point. I think, if I would just revise what I was saying and saying say that the potential
Mhm.
for a high level of organization exists today that I don't think existed then. The other thing, it was heavily a youth movement.
Yeah.
And you know, like youth are like, you know, herding cats. I hate except the youth here.
What does it mean though? Herding cats. I'm not very familiar with cats. So
Cats can't be direct. Everybody goes there. But yeah, but
Out of curiosity, why do
No,
you say
that's
that?
why do I say what that?
That
can't.
today there's more potential for organization, or like that.
Because I think it's more grassroots.
Okay.
I know there was one thing I always heard Henry Winston and those say, the grassroots, we have to bring the grassroots into this. We have to bring the working class. Now the trade union movement was an obstacle, trade union leadership, an obstacle. And black leaders, but that's what I meant.
So,
But
you know,
let me, what is it?
I'm not sure exactly, though I feel you. I feel what you're saying. And that organization won't be really reliant on the younger generation.
No, it will in
You
certain
think
ways.
so?
I think, see, the question is, the younger generation cannot do it alone.
Well,
And the idea that, when we get to Kendrick Lamar, I think Jerry will talk a little bit about this,
you know
that
what?
we
You're
can
right.
do
Yeah.
it, we're going to do it because we've been betrayed by earlier generations. Now, let me tell you, every young generation feels that it was betrayed by their parents.
Right.
You know, on every level. You know, not just politically.
Of course.
So it's this sense of we're doing the best. See, it's all, youth can't do it alone.
No.
Because the youth need political education. Frankly, as we're saying in the
Yes.
thing for the
Yeah.
10th anniversary,
Yeah.
the youth need political and moral education.
Yes.
You know, all the time. And, but today, I think, when you get 57 members of the House of Representatives,
Yeah.
so what percentage of the 300 and,
I think it's like almost 400. I think.
yeah, 400.
Also,
So you could say
430.
57 is what percent? I mean, you know, during the war in Vietnam, you could not imagine that if your life depended on
And
it.
from white districts.
And
mostly.
from white,
Yeah.
quote, conservative
Yeah.
districts.
Yeah.
Or, you know, the guy, or the fact that, as Noam Chomsky said, the only major statesman in the West that is challenging this war in Ukraine is Donald Trump. I mean, that's not a surprise for us in the free school, but, you know, for a lot of people, it's a surprising thing.
Yeah, well, you know, on this point, because I think this is actually a good question that Emil raised about organization, because you know, just as we talk about like the elite and the elite's intellectuals know very little organically about Black America, I think they also know very little about these, you know, like heartland white areas.
Yeah.
You know, for example, it's very significant that these members of the House and also the senators, they represent these predominantly white areas where also the military heavily recruits from. Those are, you know, like these small towns in Georgia and Kentucky and so on. And they're not on the map, as it were, for you know, our analysts and journalists and so on. So we don't know a whole lot about what's going on there. And the other thing came to mind was you know, what preceded the January 6th incident, which is when Trump, I think on a weekday, like I think it was a Tuesday, called a rally in DC, of which January 6th was just a fraction, but most people didn't storm the Capitol. But it was about 300,000 people came. So there's some kind of organization that brought 300,000 people from around the country to the Capitol on a weekday. You know, so there's something there. I mean, I could speculate. I mean, I've read a little bit because you read about what's happened to some of the January 6th people who've been charged with stuff. A lot of them came through churches or through other organizations like that. They organized buses and carpools and so on. So yeah, I think that's still a factor. The other thing is we were talking earlier about how the media is so cynically twisting this tragedy, and the other thing is they're using it to attack any dissident voice. Like particularly, they've been attacking Tucker Carlson a lot, saying he's somehow directly to blame for this Buffalo shooting, and which is also a horrible thing. But I think the propaganda apparatus is so much stronger than it was in the 60s or 70s. And by the way, it's not just their reach in the United States; their reach around the world
Absolutely.
is very strong.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's coming under challenge, which is good, but it's still we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And yeah, this whole thing about replacement theory also. I mean, I think this is something that has to be investigated because they're talking about it. I saw Tucker did an episode where he talked about like he played clips of all these Democratic politicians, including Biden when he was a senator, talking about how it's a great thing. The demographics of the country will be browner,
Right.
and whites. It's like whites like me won't be majority anymore. It's a great thing, and so I mean it makes you ask the question, particularly when it comes to immigration. Like what is it's not a shocking thing for me that they do believe in some kind of social engineering, which is also why we criticize the liberal position on immigration and open borders and all that sort of thing.
Right.
But also the irony is a lot of immigrants aren't voting Democrat. A lot of them are going
Countries
to
where
Trump.
sort of
so-
plan.
But so it's this is all you can't let them get away with this thing of replacement theory.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, and we can't let them get away with trivializing the fears that people have. About this. And I'm always in this crisis. I don't know why I'm always going back to Martin Luther King, and he was not one who just talked about the problem. Where is their solution? Where is their way out? And he always believed. He didn't put it this way, of giving working people a fighting chance. I mean, as opposed to this, a lot of people fear that they're going to lose their jobs and have lost their jobs, that they're going to be impoverished. I mean, that's everywhere, everywhere. And so to trivialize that, these people have legitimate fears. And this, I think for us, this ruling class has messed this country up. It is responsible. I agree with you, Emil, on this. Let's point to where the source of this demise, this civilizational crisis is. But I'm sorry, Jerry, and then Alice. Let me let Alice answer.
I was gonna say it also reminds me a lot of King and how for whichever situations or that he was facing of the time, he always brought up this concept of the world house, the beloved community, the single garment of destiny, because that was the vision in driving how do you heal a society that is plagued with these questions of war, racism, poverty. And that's such a deep contrast to what we're calling the ruling elite, the narrative that's being pushed forward of continuing to divide the society. And it's how do you expect, or how is it surprising that events like what had happened in Buffalo are happening when the ruling elite is pushing down this narrative there's a whole segment of society in which you are to hate or which are backwards and are there's no possibility of unity. And that's not even a small minority of the population. Actually, it's a huge segment that are being left behind. And I think it asks the question, I know Doc, you also mentioned before, it's why is this happening? And you would imagine that people like King or people who did see these possibilities were responsible to the people. And I think the opposite is true, where the ruling elite is totally not responsible for the people in which it's governing, or is hoping to govern, or seeking to govern. And it also draws to this idea of how is the world also viewing the U.S.? Do they see, I think for many of us who do care about the American people, but also how we're to build bridges with other countries, how do countries like China or India or like South America think about the U.S.? Do they see the American people as separate from the ruling elite? And I think there is a hope in that. For some of us, we had read the speech by Song Qing-Lang, and she had talked about Western imperialism, and she had said like there is a difference between the ruling elite and also the people. And we must remember that even though the policies that are being dictated are not revolutionary or for the purposes of freedom or even peace in the world, we have to remember that there are people actually that they don't reflect the interests of the people. And then also the piece of like, how does a ruling elite that does not represent the interests of the people continue to stay in power and continue to push down policies that don't reflect the people? And it's that they have to continuously lie to them.
That's right.
And that's what's happening. We're being fed all of these lies, but how long can this propaganda continue? And will people believe it? Will people continue to believe this lie? And I think our stance is that, like at some point it's gonna break.
Right.
That we won't accept the lies that are being told. And actually we have to bring back the tradition that we have studied, which is King, which is Gandhi, which is all of these different figures that actually had a vision that was for the people.
Good, Jerry.
Well, yeah, I also wanted to mention a few things, but one of which was that I think over the same weekend as the Buffalo shooting, there was another shooting. Well, there was one in California in a church, in a Taiwanese church, and there was another one in Dallas actually, where I think it was a black guy who shot up a hair salon, but it was. It's actually very personal to me because that's a hair salon that my family goes to in Dallas, in like the old Koreatown in that city, and yeah, I think they're reporting that the shooter, like thankfully no one was killed. There were just a few people injured, but the shooter reportedly, was also motivated by a kind of fear of Asian people.
Yeah.
And
See, this is why. I'm sorry.
No.
You're absolutely right, and I wanted to say that. Look, people are alienated, alone, and that and the environment also produces schizophrenic behavior, schizophrenia.
Right.
It's not just all the individual and something went wrong with his brain or whatever. It is that is why the question. That's why King is needed more than ever.
Yeah. Right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's exactly.
You see it all over New York, pushing Chinese people off the platform of the train.
Yeah.
This is affecting broad swaths of the American society.
All the violent cultural stuff,
All the
like
violent-
video games, TV, movies, music,
But then war.
of course,
Yeah.
the root of it all. Yeah.
That's why Biden goes up to Buffalo and he's all this, that, and the other. And then now let's get back to the real business, war.
Right.
Yeah.
In a way, culturally, if you're not addressing that question, you're reinforcing.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
that's the point.
Yeah.
And you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. You're a hypocrite. I think that's part of why his poll numbers are declining, because people see him as a hypocrite.
Right. Well, the two quick things also that I wanted to say were that I think similar to the headline that Emily mentioned, Rolling Stone read a headline after the Buffalo shooting that said the Buffalo shooter is a normal Republican.
See,
He's just an ordinary Republican. And I think especially to make that statement after the only source of dissent to the Ukraine war funding bill was from the Republican Party, like that is sending a very strong message. I think particularly, to black people, that if you take an anti-war position, that you're siding with the Buffalo, the Buffalo shooter, which is
see, it's
and then one quick thing also about also with what Jahan was saying about replacement theory, I think it's just been so strange to hear the media talk about this as like a conspiracy theory amongst like these white radicals, when I feel like, I don't know if this is just my perception of things, but I feel like for people who, especially I think young people who kind of go through liberal institutions or woke institutions, there's a very broad, like, baseline assumption or hope that as the country becomes less white, that it'll become more liberal and more democratic. Big D. Everyone thinks that. You don't even have to say it. That is a common assumption. And yes, it's also, I think even like, you know, at the Korea Vietnam event, when Brandon described, you know, how the ruling class produced this class of refugees for the express purpose of making them, you know, able to be easily manipulated and controlled. I think it's very clear that, like, first of all, there is a broad understanding amongst the democratic, like, elites and also many people who are, like, very, you know, they align with the Democratic Party, that they, you know, for many years have wanted there to be more immigration, as Johan was saying, because it will create a greater voter base for the Democratic Party. And it's just insane to me now that they're saying, like, oh, this is a conspiracy theory. When actually it was just Tucker was reporting that the Democrats were saying these things. And Tucker was the one who was like, actually, you know, they think this, and this is their agenda, but it's not going to work because many of, you know, the Hispanic immigrants are going to vote Trump. And so they're the ones who are wrong. It's insane to me that, you know, they're turning this around and making it something which is, you know, yeah, it's a conspiracy which has been created by the white, you know, like this sort of white fascist movement, when it's like, no, like you've been the ones who've been saying this the whole time. And you've been boasting and cheering about it like this whole time, that yeah, demographics is destiny, like as we immigrate, like we bring in more immigrants, we'll create a greater voter base. And so yeah, just like the level of hypocrisy and like the lying is
and they
incredible.
always were clear going back, you know, when they first were coming forward with this neoliberal globalization, they were always very straightforward. This is a way to lower the wages of American workers. Oh, you don't want to accept GM's terms? Well, we'll move the plant down to Mexico or to China. And then, oh, you still don't want to accept us? Well, we're going to open the borders and bring in people who don't have citizenship rights and therefore cannot fight. You know, I mean, it was always, and they succeeded in it. And now there's this pushback. But you know, one of the things I constantly remember from Brandon's presentation, and both the words and the spirit of it, is that he was saying they want to groom us to be morally and ideologically indifferent. And Brandon is brilliant in understanding this. And the first step to that is to create a hostility towards African Americans. That's the way you get it. You know, now you're not going to be white, especially Cambodians and Vietnamese, except for a couple. But we're going to make you or give you the psychological and ideological conditions to be hostile to black people. And not just to individuals, but to the whole history of black struggle. And that's, go ahead, Emily.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Chumbarto, I'm sorry.
I wanted to add to what Jeremiah was saying, and also Jahan mentioned at some point. You know, the schizophrenia that's like really rampant about like connecting these, you know, white terrorists to the conservative camp of the Republican Army and such. I was recently reading this recent article that Glenn Greenwald wrote, and I think it was an informative article because it talks about like a number of these other previous white terrorists who actually, in public they pledged their allegiance to the Democratic Party and to these shows by Rachel Maddow and Democracy Now! And so on and such. And he makes the point that even though we have seen several other clearly extremely mentally ill people shooting up in the name of ideology, there has never been this attempt to tie ideologies to the most extreme proponents of such, even though the victims of the shooting were the same as the class that is portrayed by certain kinds of shows and certain camps of politicians or mainstream media. But I think in terms of how the reach of mainstream media is in the rest of the world and how these shootings are portrayed in the rest of the world. I think there is, I mean, the impression that I've always had, and you know, most people outside and most people inside this country also do in academia, especially, that in this, I think the idea is that the shooters and you know these mass shootings, they're you know, they're all part of this homogeneous identity, and they are always, you know, camped along with the white racists and such and such. I mean, the fact that there exists this dichotomy is not at all shown. And I was thinking as I was reading the article that, you know, I do remember reading about the 2017 shooting at DC, but when that was portrayed in all kinds of mainstream media, it was really shown in the same light. The fact that, you know, this person had, like, you know, publicly avowed claims about, you know, how the Republicans are the worst things that happened to this country. None of this was made public. And the fact that, you know, this is all of this you know, is coming out now from like very few sources, it seems to show that, you know, there is there are big sources which are attempting to hide these realities and try to portray it as a homogeneous ideology, when clearly, you know, there are different you know, kinds of extremists going with different ideologies. So the question is, are you attacking the shooter or are you attacking certain ideologies?
That's very
So
yeah.
yeah.
Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, I think what you were saying about like King and the ruling elite, like the desire to heal versus basically just stoking race war and tensions, is really deep. Because I was reading this speech that King gave. It was a sermon in 1956, and it's just called "Living Under the Tensions of Modern Life." And so he is describing the tension. He says, like, modern life is characterized by endless tensions.
Just speak up a little bit, not so fast.
Modern life is characterized by endless tensions. On all levels of life, men are experiencing disruption and conflict, self-destruction and meaninglessness. And if we turn our eyes around our nation, we discover that the psychopathic wards of our hospitals are filled today. Fear and anxiety have risen to the throne of modern life, and very few persons escape the influence of their powerful domination. It is probably true to say that we live today in one of the most, if not the most, frustrated generations of all human history. Now, what accounts for this tension, this anxiety, this confusion so characteristic of modern life? What is the causal basis for all of the tensions in our modern world? I'll say if we are to find the cause, we must look for more than one, and it's a plurality of causes that have all conjoined to make for the tensions of our generation. And so he describes that, like, the tension that comes from, like, the competitive struggle to make a living. So basically, like, the economy, like jobs, like basically pitting people against each other, which is, I think, what you were saying with immigration and like the joblessness of like the white working class now, and how that is like built to basically stoke tension. And then tension also grows out of the whole of modern urbanization and the industrial structure of modern life, like big cities, large populations, and you're meant to feel lost in the crowd. Like you're a cog in an industrial machine, and then man becomes depersonalized. And then he says, and then there's a tension that results from the fears accompanying a war-torn world. Like we find ourselves today standing amid the threat of war at every hand, and we often wonder what will happen. We feel at times that the future is uncertain, and we look out and feel that the future is shrouded with impenetrable obscurities, that we don't know how things will turn out. Every young man that grows up in this world has to face the fact that he just doesn't know how the future will turn out, because there's the endless round of preparing for war. Yeah. We know that we stand today at any moment to be plunged across the abyss of atomic destruction, and all of that causes us to fear and live in tension and agony, wondering how things will turn out. This is a part of the general fear and tension and anxiety of modern life. And then he says there's the tension that comes as a result of man's general finite situation, like being and non-being. And so like it's really incredible, because I feel like you can see the whole structure that we're in today. And then he talks about basically that you need religion. Like you need God, you need the third dimension of life. Like when you're saying like, oh, you need to have a sky, like a proper moral education, or the capacity to accept yourself, to accept reality, but also to basically try to change it. Like he says, like you need to accept yourself because it's dangerous to repress your emotions. And so we must do something else, not repress, but sublimate. That's another big psychological word that we use in the modern world, sublimation. But religion gives you the art of sublimation, and so you don't repress your emotions. You substitute the positive for the negative of repression. You sublimate instead of repressing, and that is what religion gives us when we go into Christ.
Is that like sublation?
I mean, I feel like it is kind of like you're
Sounds
actually
very
like
similar,
creatively generating something instead of regressing or just trying to shove things
He's
down.
talking about the black church.
Yeah.
And that's the role of the black church,
Yeah.
to give a sky. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's kind of clear what, yeah.
This night it's Saturday.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, I got distracted. I was going to say that this conversation is also reminding me of Baldwin, because I remember in the reading group that we have with Nandita and Raju and all of us about the Indian struggle. At some point we turned to Baldwin because we thought it was important to not just understand the struggle against imperialism, but also to understand the white man. And when I say the white man, I mean the ruling elite, not the working class struggling white American. But I think this is one of the struggles for our times, to be able to describe to people in South Asia when we're doing this kind of reading groups. So many different reading groups based on this one idea that we have to learn from our history we have to learn from our history how to wage this struggle against imperialism. But what is the biggest obstacle, it seems to us, is to be able to actually convince people that this is the condition here. Nobody can see it because, it's just like because of all the propaganda and the media, the crux of the matter is always remains hidden, and all that you see are just manifestations which are not the whole truth. And nobody really understands what
I can understand. She's talking about in South Asia, where she tries to explain to her mother, I just came from Kensington and what I saw, and her mother says, no, that couldn't be in America, the richest country in the world.
But also in general among the youth, when you ask them what they think the chief contradictions are, what is it that our fight is for today, it's always some sort of something that sprung out of a bigger problem, that is imperialism and war. It could be in India right now, the conversation about caste. It could be anything, but it could be communalism, Hindus and Muslims fighting against each other, right? But these are things that have been weaponized to distract from the main problem. And so this is why Baldwin is so important, because he really gets to the psychological basis of the conflict. And then once you understand where all of this is stemming from, when you understand how you have to look at the white man, then again you have to come back to King, because then he says that once you know what the struggle is that you have to wage, how you wage the struggle is equally important. I mean, you can't do it any way, because when there's so much pressure on you to sort of devolve to your basest instincts, you have to rise above that and be the best version of yourself. And that's what Nuri was reading out, that also reminded me strongly of that. But yeah, I just have that thought.
Maybe we can transition to Kendrick Lamar's album. I know it's not the easiest.
Are we gonna play the album?
Let's have a listening party.
I assume we'll get shut down.
We held a listening party and launched in Accra, Ghana. Actually, the first place he
Oh,
went
really?
to. Yeah, was in Ghana.
Wow.
He had first released his album ahead of coming to charts in Accra, Ghana. I remember maybe I'm saying Accra, but like Accra. Yeah. But that's all I know. I haven't really made sense of it. All I know is just it made me sad to think about the state of the Du Bois Museum and
Right, absolutely.
Absolutely. I don't know. There are many don't have many things to say on
We also have some comments, I think.
Oh yeah, let's do the comments first. Yeah.
Dr. Lorenzo Woodson says good morning. Nathan says good morning. Dr. Lorenzo Woodson, I don't know if you know.
That's
who that-
Carter, right? Carter Woodson? Is
No,
that-
Lorenzo.
no. Carter Woodson been dead.
Yeah.
Unless he
No,
came.
there's another guy.
I didn't. Oh, they got it. Oh, I'm
He
sorry.
just calls
He's a
himself
friend.
that.
Oh, okay.
Oh, he's a friend of.
okay.
Okay.
He's
Um,
for some time.
Yeah, he asked the question, does such an act, referring to the Buffalo shooter, does such an act always equate with mental illness? I see it otherwise. Like, I think he's saying, like, is it always just, like, attributable to mental illness, or is it more ideological?
No,
Whereas
I-
I feel like it's a mix of both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I would say no, it is not. But this case, it was. If you could say that it could be ideological and psychological together, or certain people who are psychotic have a predisposition to certain extreme ideas, but if you were to balance the two out, I think the strongest thing in this case was the psychological, but that's what
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and Danny has also a comment contributing to the discussion around, are the people united? Are they organized? He said, I don't think we should just assume that crises unite people.
True.
If that is the case, then we don't need to do anything.
Mhm.
The process of history will take care of everything.
Mhm.
But to the degree that older problems are overcome, they also create the possibility for new obstacles. That would be the dialectic in capitalism, the transformation of a contradiction. We should keep that in mind, or else the discontents with war and inflation will be captured by just a new capitalist politician. The ruling class can also be united despite openly attacking each other. They can be united in assumptions and in the horizon of politics. The Republicans call Democrats communists, and Democrats call the Republicans fascists. But they mutually accept that the Republicans are the quote right, and the Democrats are quote left. They mutually accept the horizon of what is possible. And then he had earlier comments about Dane, who mentioned, or Dane, who translated one of Angela Davis's seminar papers that she wrote for Adorno's class, and he shared the link in the comments. And he also shared an interview that Platypus did with Angela Davis, where she talked about her experience in Frankfurt. Also, Cornelius Lockett says, good afternoon, tuning into the free school for the first time.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just kind of like thinking through what we're talking about right now, because it seems like it's just so. It's like my question is still like, well, why? What is the position of Black people, and where is it that they're trying to get at? What is the disposition? And it's not like a situation where I can say one definite,
Thing.
thing that generally Black people are saying. Though I can say what they want, and I know, or I have a feeling of what they want is peace. They don't want any of the violence in home, or in the communities, or in general, and things like that. But it just seems like all the efforts of the Democratic Party are, and to what you're saying, to keep women and Black people in the Democratic Party. And that I'm just really like that is just to think about in terms of the level of the crisis in which this country is in. That also kind of line of thinking, like in conjunction with, white working people. And we're gonna have a conversation soon about culture, which is a signifier definitely of interests and positionality. But it's just
It's a very, and this is why we need empirical sociology. We need theories, because you're right. And we need to live among the people, which we in the free school try to do in their institutions and their lives. It is a very difficult thing. And as you know, in a lot of ways, the way black people go will determine the way this nation goes.
So I had asked Mamie just kind of offhandedly because I was on the phone with Magna about different stuff, and I asked her like, okay, what did you think about the Buffalo shooting? And she was like, yeah, it was just another white, killing black people. And in passing, again, similar with the Roe v. Wade, it doesn't seem like a situation where you could really have an argument with, because
But you know what the argument is?
Yeah,
The argument is to the elites, the
Right.
ruling elites. Don't you act like
Right.
you
Right.
have such a principled opposition to black people being killed
Right.
or in prison.
Right. But the fact that
And that's where, for me, the outrage for me is more than what happened, the hypocritical attempt to use it.
Against you.
Yeah, for base political gain.
Right.
Just like the whole thing of Biden going to Buffalo and then saying, I did my thing there, now let's get on with the real business of war.
I'm feeling that completely.
I can deal, this young
all
boy
surface
and
level.
all of the advocates of what they call replacement theory or whatever, all the white extremist groups, all of that, but that's a small thing compared to the larger picture. That's where I'm at.
Because also to that point, it's like, what's really a problem with white people? Because it's like
But this is another question. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
No.
I'm sorry, sir.
It's not. I mean, it's just a dynamic that I see common, which is to say, oh, it's better if you are like a little more colored, or if you're like black and things like that. But it's like, if the media, the establishment is using that against black people, that also squeezes out where white people can be in the struggle.
Well, it's using against black people and against white people.
But that's the thing.
See, these white elites, they don't
black
have much feeling for white people either. And I'll tell you this, at this point, they might have more contempt for them because than they do for, they have a paternalism towards black. It's a sickening paternalism. And we don't, we as black folk, any black person of any backbone don't want.
You can't succumb to that.
Biden's paternalism? I don't need you to tell me nothing because you signed off on that bill that imprisoned 1/4 of the young generation of black men.
First of all,
So I'm just saying, where's the nation going, and where's black people going? We want. This is why. Can I just, if you don't mind, just, when we can get to Kendrick in this point, to me, indifference to the great struggle of ideas is equivalent or goes along with a kind of a moral indifference. We are interested in ideas because we want to be on the right side of the ideological struggle. Now, if you don't have the heart for it, you back away from it. Accept the moral condemnation that goes with it. We meet here every week, not because we're just driven by ideas in the very narrow sense, but because we have a deep sense of the moral imperative. If it were just ideas, we could bring our knitting stuff and sit around and meet at somebody's house on Friday night and drink wine and talk trash. If it were just ideas. But if the ideas are not driven by deep morality is the criteria of the ideas. Does that make? I don't know.
No, it doesn't.
What is right in ideas ultimately is what is right morally. What is right morally is what is right for humanity.
That's right.
And if you can this is what we're talking about, Gandhi and the Indian independence movement. And poor brother and I were just kicking this morning. Said, look at here. We take no prisoners. We take no prisoners when it comes to Indian independence. If you got a problem with it, that's your problem. But in terms of Indian independence and Gandhi, which we're going to have to reopen that question again, we got to. This is the issue. The moral issue of our time is connected to the battle of ideas. That's what
And just to add, because that is one, okay, we do take a principled stand.
Absolutely.
On questions of war and peace, on the questions of our time.
Yes.
But another thing that I was actually talking to Vigna about over the phone, and the same conversation where I asked Mamie, is because I was drawing parallels between India and America today, because it seems like, or it feels like, or maybe also from what Meghna has been able to observe with her being there, that there's the same or similar dynamics between older people and younger people. There's the same forgetting of what's important, like Gandhi and King.
Yeah.
And then that got me to the point of saying, well, we need to learn about ourselves again. We need to know ourselves.
Always.
And things like that. But
always. That's why the pedagogy
yeah, right.
for this time.
Yeah.
How do we educate the people, and where do we do it?
That's
you
another
know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I feel
one of the distasteful things about the American left, whatever that is, by the way, is that they do not want to educate the masses. They can attack Gandhi till the cows come home. What did Gandhi do? He went among the people and educated them through example, through his words, through his reclaiming the best of Hinduism.
That's right.
And Islam in India. Ahimsa. Santagraya. What the hell was he saying that for? All of you experts, you have no idea. Because you have, and Purba made this point at the meeting, contempt for Gandhi is really contempt for the masses of India. Because the masses of India embraced him. That's what you don't like. So, this is you can't just be aloof about this. Once you get engaged, these are moral issues of human life, of children. Let's keep it even that real. This is what when we get. Well, let's go on into Kendrick Lamar. Go ahead, Al. Go ahead.
I promise this is gonna segue into Kendrick. No, it was really interesting when Serafina was saying how it's important to know yourself, because what Serafina is saying is that knowing yourself means going back to your people and to know history and figures like Gandhi. But that's so different from what we're going to talk about when we talk about Kendrick Lamar, because he's also talking about knowing yourself, but it's so different. It's so different from what Serafina and what we are saying.
Okay, wait, let's say what he said.
He's saying where it's like, I think his whole thing is like knowing yourself means like retreating into yourself and from people, and that people themselves, like people expect too much of me, or like
I'm a dooney.
Well, Alice, why don't you open up the conversation?
Should we read that review?
Yeah, maybe you can.
You want to read that aloud? I'm not against it.
Yeah, just parts.
This is the review from the New York Times, and it, of course, Kendrick Lamar is celebrated, and he got a Pulitzer Prize for one of his albums.
my mind when I thought about it.
And yeah, I feel a certain way. Aretha Franklin never got.
Marvin
John.
Gaye never.
No, nobody ever got that. But yeah, okay. So
Yeah, and the infuriating thing is not that the ruling class is not willing to educate, it's also miseducated.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's the most terrible thing because you read this piece and you think to yourself, how can this be passed on to our children? Like, is this really what the future of our children looks like? People who retreat into themselves,
But
don't know
back
who
to
survey
King.
is.
the children will have no sky.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you want to read the review, Jerry?
Okay, sure. I can read a few paragraphs from it. Yeah, this
Why don't
is.
you read the whole thing?
Well,
What do you think? You think?
well, what do you see is most necessary?
Well, yeah. Were you in? I don't know. Do you want to read it, Kathy?
I could read it if you. Well.
Okay, I'll just read a few paragraphs and yeah, I don't think
But
all
she
of
was
it's
asking what paragraphs are you going to read?
I think just like the first ones,
first two.
the first ones are good. So yeah, it's written by John Caramanica, and then the title is Kendrick Lamar, Mortal Icon.
Immortal icon.
No, Mortal Icon.
Oh, okay.
So it says, Kendrick Lamar has long extracted maximum power from his blend of the interior and the global, making him a particular kind of generational superstar, one who shoulders the weight of others. In a few places on Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, the rapper's 5th studio album, he laments from the top of the mountain he spent the last decade climbing. These are depleted, lonely incantations. Quote, I can't please everybody. I choose me. I'm sorry.
Ew.
Lamar, 34, is an astonishing technician, a keen observer of black life, a proletarian superhero.
Actually, slow down, woman. Could you read that?
Lamar, 34, is an astonishing technician, a keen observer of black life, a proletarian superhero, an artist who reckons with moral weight in his work. Yeah, that's a very bold, bold title to attribute to him.
Tell me what.
They're trying to displace King and implant Kendrick Lamar.
Or even Du Bois, like sociology.
Have you ever heard the term the proletarian superhero used before?
No, I've never heard that.
Except for comic book characters.
But you say that beginning is bold. Why do you say so, Jeremiah?
Well, I mean, I
It
said
is,
so
but I want to
because
know
of
why.
your initial reaction from the proletarian superhero part.
I took that word.
But yeah, I mean, because the article, first of all, like it takes this trajectory of being like, okay, Kendrick Lamar, proletarian superhero, the man who's been able to bear the weight of the entire world and to channel it into this revolutionary art that represents the truth of black people, of the black proletariat, essentially. You know, then it starts from that assertion, and then it says, in this album, Kendrick is basically, you know, he's at the top of the mountain. Maybe that's a reference to King being on the mountaintop.
It's like the weight of the world. He has to take it all.
Right. But then from that, this album is him turning inwards and saying, I just need to accept myself as an individual, as a man.
As a mere mortal.
As a mere mortal, yeah.
Like we didn't know. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
Wait, also, but Jeremiah, read the caption of the photo they feature.
No, this one?
Well, under the photo of Kendrick Lamar in the article, like, and this is something Alice pointed out to me. It says Kendrick Lamar's 5th album is about retreating within and pondering your accountability to the person in the mirror.
Wow.
Like
The man in the mirror.
But not even like.
Not in a positive
come
way,
from.
not in a universal way. It's all. I mean, it's very actually
Jackson
Hegel. Our study philosophy, I think,
It's so
explains what's very wrong about this, how postmodern it is. Because there's no belief in a singular truth. There's no such thing as the truth. It's all collapses into individual opinion. like I am who I am, like the only truth is me, I don't have to be accountable to anything universal, lasting.
That's like the three-dimensional
Yeah.
complete, like not even getting to the first dimension very well.
Yeah.
Negative 3 dimensions.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll just read also the last 3 paragraphs because it ties to that. Because actually, like, the review is not super positive about the album itself.
Yeah,
It's kind of mixed. But it says, at his best, Lamar embodies the deep creative promises of the art form of rapping. He provides hope that there are ways of agglomerating syllables that haven't yet been thought of. That word,
agglomerating syllables.
like putting together.
That's
So,
mumbling.
yeah. That word and cadence and meaning can still collide in unanticipated ways. His voice is squeaky and malleable, and it's often most riveting when untethered from simple rhythms.
It's raw.
But there is a difference between effort and achievement, and when Lamar is underachieving, say on the song Crown, the air fills with expectancy. Surely more is just around the corner. That said, one gift of the Lamar aura is that he frees those around him to reach for transcendence. Ghostface Killah, a veteran so accepted as a lyrical Hulk as to be taken for granted, appears on Purple Hearts with an astonishing floating verse.
Military reference, Purple Hearts. Purple Hearts in the military, when you get wounded, you get a Purple Hearts in the medal.
Yeah, Lamar's cousin Baby Keem also shines on Savior Interlude, as does Kodak Black on Silent Hill. Such is the enviable house that Lamar has built over the last decade, one that demands more of everyone who visits. But Mr. Morel reveals him to be a titan who is a victim of idolatry.
Could you say a titan?
A titan who is a victim of idolatry.
Okay.
So they're
Yeah.
saying that he is succumbed to the fact that people have idolized him.
Right.
Lamar knows that in truth, no one is a hero and maybe no one should be. He is just a man. Allow him that.
Ew, like. Because like they're trying to degrade. It's like you degrade all black men first of all, and then say there's no one we can stand for. No, and then I don't know. There's a lot of different influences in the writer. It seems ideologically, but.
Well, read the paragraph about the song about his father.
Father died.
Oh, father time?
Yeah.
Oh, this begins with family, and 2 of the most moving songs on the album deal with Lamar's parents. On Father Time, he details how his father raised him to be unforgiving of himself and to bury his insecurities, his uncertainties. Quote, men should never show feelings, being sensitive never helped. His mama died. I asked him why he going back to work so soon. His reply was, son, that's life. The bill's got no silver spoon. Yeah, and then there's the song about his mother.
Can you read that?
Yeah, Mother I Sober, which is the song title, which features sagging vocals from Beth Gibbons of Portishead, traverses domestic abuse and Lamar's frustration at his own childhood inaction, but then telescopes out to his own failings in the form of infidelity. Hearing Lamar apparently confess to this kind of intimate disloyalty is part of an immolation of the ethical persona he's cultivated for years. And then also, then the next paragraph, he goes even further on We Cry Together, an outlandish tit-for-tat about a profoundly broken relationship with the role of his partner vividly speak-rapped by the actress Taylor Page. The song pulses with a startlingly raw toxicity, even if construed as character work. It is also, perhaps perversely, one of the most musically successful songs on the album, a shuddering alignment of rhythm and sentiment. And then, I guess I'm just reading this article. But the opposite is true of Auntie Diaries, in which Lamar raps about 2 people close to him who come out as transgender. He does this in an earnest but clunky way. There is misgendering and there is dead naming. And in his retelling of childhood ignorance, he invokes and repeats a homophobic slur several times. These are faux pas, and so is this airless, joyless production. It is as sonically uncommitted as it is apathetic. And actually, that was interesting because basically the critiquer or the reviewer was saying that this song is bad because it's not woke enough.
Yeah, a lot of this seemed like they were hating on him.
But that he
falling
Loving
from
criticism.
a pedestal. I felt like a lot of this article was going for like, oh, you've fallen a little from the pedestal we put you on. But maybe that's also.
I feel like it's almost trying to justify the hypocrisy of wokeness. Because I feel like he is kind of like a woke king. Because I remember I first really heard of him because he was rapping on the Black Panther. And that was like a really big moment. And then, so I feel like he's very like woke, and then it seems like what he's saying or what the reviewer is saying in the article, it's not that he's not woke enough. I feel like because the reviewer ultimately still really respects him as an artist. Basically says like, this is progress. Like, isn't that part where he literally says like, okay, yeah, it's, so he's saying, sorry, I'm just gonna read it. Lamar is the rare popular musician who receives almost universal acclaim, not only artistically, but often as a kind of paragon of virtue. But there are all sorts of complexities and heterodoxies that are suffocated by uncomplicated embrace. So they're saying that we should complicatedly embrace him. Mr. Morale appears to be a corrective for that. It's an album that aims to repel, or if not quite that, then at least is at peace with alienating some of its audience. It's also a reminder of how rare it is these days to encounter popular music with unstable politics and a gut punch to
with unstable?
Yeah, so it's saying like basically like he's not consistent all the time. Like basically that it's too hard to be perfect, but like he's still woke. And I think, I don't know, I think my feeling was that like ultimately his position is so secure as like the progressive rapper of the ruling elite that even if he basically says like, oh, maybe it's not all that, I'm not perfect, it's not great, like they still are willing to go with it.
Well, I think the point of this article, but also Kendrick Lamar, why this specific album is being promoted, is because actually I remember Kendrick Lamar back in 2008, or when he first came out with his mixtapes. He even the woke people, or the pre-woke who became woke.
The what?
The pre-woke who became woke back then. They didn't like Kendrick Lamar.
The pre-woke?
Oh, the pre-woke.
They didn't like Kendrick Lamar because they asked him, are you going to vote for Obama? And Kendrick Lamar said, why would I vote when voting doesn't, when basically, he was like, why should I vote when this government doesn't do anything?
What an organic position.
But now, this album, I think, is Kendrick Lamar basically letting himself be weaponized. Because then he got so ostracized in 2008 that he corrected his position in 2012 and said, I'm going to vote for Obama.
And he was even invited to the White House and played basketball with us.
Yes, and the trans thing is also because in the past, Kendrick Lamar would make statements saying he was basically saying, well, this is not really a black thing, like a black issue. But now he's saying, oh, it's personal to me now, I'm making progress, but the point of this, the reason why this album is so dangerous is because, Kendrick Lamar was held up as a virtuous figure because people thought he represented a genuine black figure.
Yes.
But now Kendrick Lamar is saying I don't want to be anyone's hero. There should be no universal standard of goodness, rightness, righteousness, truth. I'm just a human being. So now this whole album is about how everyone's complicated. No one should be a hero. We should not look for heroes. The point of life is just to go inwards and be your genuine self.
Emily, if I ask you a question, why do you think the reviewer refers to Kendrick Lamar as a proletarian superhero? Since I would say that the reviewer is against heroizing anybody. I mean, what? And of course, the reviewer may be as confused as Kendrick Lamar, or more confused.
Yeah, I mean, it is a confusing statement, but it's coming from an ideology that's accepted this premise that we are in the postmodern age and there's no truth. So the greatest truth there could be is this muddled composition that we see. And the heroes we have are extremely, convoluted and have their own contradictions, and people have contradictions. It's a true thing. But to try to highlight these people and basically break the idea of there being a hero, a real, genuine articulation of what people need. I mean, it's like taking the stars from the sky, nothing to dream of. This idea also in art in general, this idea of removing oneself. Really, actually, I see it as removing our humanity from our art, to like distill it in this very sterile way, that we can't touch the major contradictions of society today. We can only talk about our own retreated kind of pessimistic and self-righteous truth. But it really makes me again think of this poem that I was talking about last week. And I'd actually like to read it. It's a short poem if you guys will give me. Because it talks about this, and Kendrick Lamar is, as much as we want to say he might not be someone to aspire to, he's an extremely successful artist in the society.
Yes.
He's a millionaire. He can do whatever he wants. And these are the awards we give people who don't want to touch what's going on in society. I was actually talking to Jahan about the figure Norman Finkelstein, who I consider to be a hero in our time. And he lives in an apartment by himself, and he has he can barely keep a living. It sounds like he doesn't have much of a stable environment, and that's But anyway, this is a poem by Ingeborg Bachmann. It's called Every Day. She's an Austrian poet. She's speaking about the realities of society, that she sees war all around, even if war isn't directly happening in the here and now. She says, "War is no longer declared, only continued. The monstrous has become every day. The hero stays away from battle. The weak have gone to the front. The uniform of the day is patience. Its medal, the pitiful star of hope above the heart. The medal is awarded when nothing more happens, when the artillery falls silent, when the enemy has grown invisible, and the shadow of eternal armament covers the sky. It is awarded for desertion of the flag, for bravery in the face of friends, for the betrayal of unworthy secrets, and the disregard of every command." So a lot of people may even see that as a dark poem. Obviously, she's talking about very serious.
And when did she write this?
I believe this is after World War II. This is like the 60s, 70s, I think. She actually took the wording that's used to give medals to heroes of war and kind of reversed them. Like this for bravery in the face of friends. What kind of bravery is that? Desertion of the flag. Disregard of every command. Like there's an idea that our values aren't all the same. This imperial values that we're given aren't necessarily the same as some other commands we might have that we need to disregard in order to become a Kendrick Lamar, in order to become a LeBron James, in order to become these figures that we hold up. We have different values, and we need to recognize that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Cherry.
Well,
Anna, you got something to say? Okay.
Well, I think the review and the album reminded me of what Canon Ivy had said at the church event, where she said that hip hop is not an art form that is able to transcend. And basically, it seems like the reviewer is interpreting Kendrick Lamar as admitting that hip hop as an art form cannot transcend.
Now, the question is, what did Canon Ivy mean by the word transcend?
Right.
How does she understand transcendence?
Like rather than being, this is how I understood it, was that hip hop, like she was saying that hip hop is concerned with primarily, the results of oppression, of degradation, of the destruction of black communities and all of that. But it's not able to provide a way out of that, and instead is stuck in the wallowing of things are so terrible in the black community, and therefore we're just going to keep repeating that things are terrible and give different ways of showing how terrible it is. And I feel like, basically Kendrick Lamar, who has been held up as the leading artist of this generation, who is able to give a voice to, the socially conscious issues of our time. Like that was definitely how he was presented to me, like in high school and in college, and why I think I gravitated towards his music in high school and stuff, because it's presented as basically the most radical and the most progressive art that is currently being produced in America. And to have it be positioned in that way and Kendrick is also, I guess, very aware, like self-aware that like people are holding it up. He's basically saying like, yeah, we can't go any further. The best I can do now is just retreat inwards and talk about my personal trauma and talk about how messed up like our communities are. And yeah, like there was the song I think that I've seen, one of the songs that I've seen get the most attention online is the one where it's a replaying of an argument between a man and a woman, a couple, and basically it's just like, you know, we were talking about this on the bus, but part of the appeal of hip hop and someone like Kendrick too, you know, especially like the like liberal, college educated kind of young people, is that, you know, it appears to provide a truthful window into Black life, which is what the reviewer is also saying, that he's the best, most skilled like portrayer of Black life in America today. And it's not. It's like it's a misrepresentation. It's an affirmation actually of many of the things that people assume are wrong with Black people, because it's basically just showing how like this man and women are so angry at each other and they keep insulting each other, and then like spoiler alert, they end up having sex afterwards after this whole tirade of like basically like yelling at each other. And it's like, yeah, basically Kendrick is saying like, oh, isn't it so ironic that like this is how Black people, you know, like Black men and women relate to each other. But that's what people are interpreting as like, wow, like Kendrick is so real.
Truthful.
He's showing the real life of, you know, ordinary Black people, which otherwise I wouldn't be able to access because I'm not part of that world.
I don't want to be.
Yeah.
Kendrick should actually look in the mirror, actually, because you know how your music is going to be used. How can you make this music and let it be released, knowing that there will be all these people thinking that you are speaking to Black people?
Well, you know, the more we talk about it, the more you all talk, the clearer it's becoming to me. I understand now what they mean, proletarian superhero, because this album, Kendrick is trying to brand himself as the everyman, you know, and to be, so this album is different than the others because he's not trying to put himself at the top of the hip-hop hierarchy. He's already achieved that. Now I'm going to rebrand as the everyman, the proletarian hero, and so on. Let me just make another point.
That's right.
You see, this gets, as you know, Black people have produced the greatest art in American history. There's no two ways about it. And this has come out of the struggle of Black people, the engagement of the artist with his and her people. I don't care whether it's Billie Holiday, Ma Rainey, Mahalia, Aretha, Duke Ellington. There was never a question that they all would sacrifice money and fame to serve the people. You know what I'm saying? There was no two ways about it. And the music reflects that. They were not attempting, most of them, to cross over and to get rich. And they knew that their art was the greatest art this country had ever seen, that it could transform this country, and that the world recognized it. They were, you know, all of them were just excited always to go to Asia or Europe. They always were, because they said, even though we will not be fully appreciated in our own country, outside of this country, we're fully appreciated. They also knew, and this is the question of art and the dialectics of art. And I'm not making this up at all. They knew that their music was in conversation with the music of the world. So you get Karuna Supreme, you know, with these great Pakistani artists, or you get Alice and John Coltrane engaging with Hinduism, or you get and you get the
Duke Ellington, Far Eastern.
Duke Ellington and his pieces about what's the ancient city in
Isfahan.
Persia?
Isfahan.
Isfahan. What? Come on now. Come on. You're talking about. I'm going within myself when the whole history of black art and music is to go to the world and to the world house, world humanity, humanize it, and to learn and to incorporate all of this. So I think this raises a question for me, and this is what I was struggling with when my great friend Sabrina Sample sent me this, the trailer, and I said to her, as I told y'all last week, I'm not impressed, Sabrina. The most powerful thing is him sampling Marvin Gaye's "I Want You," you know, and why is he voicing his? And I'll get to the poetry question in a minute. Why is he voicing it not as a man, a grown man, but as a 15-year-old? But she said to me, because he has a high-pitched voice. And I said, I didn't say it to her, but it's not the high-pitched voice. You know, there's a way that a 15-year-old adolescent male talks that is not the way a mature man talks. You know, and one of the ways you can know this is that as a grown person, you would not talk to your child in the voice of a 15-year-old. You know, there are generation separation. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the nature of human beings. But, and I'll just, this is the thing, art, this word, you know, now talking to Serafina, I got some questions about Basquiat. Whether that's art. Was it you?
No.
Maybe it was you, Jerry. Maybe it was it you?
You mentioned it this past
Yeah,
week,
somebody. And then, what is art, and what is the function of art? What is the blues? And have you abandoned the blues? You know, because, like, see, I put it, there's too much missing in all of this.
There is.
It's like taking the whole postmodern thing, hook, line, and sinker, or taking, pop art. What's his name?
Andy Warhol.
Andy Warhol, hook, line, and sinker, without any critical evaluation. Well, I'm taking this, and what are the consequences of that? And then what is the blues, as Du Bois called it, the rhythmic narrative of a disappointed people? I mean, what does that mean? Why? So, what is your criteria of black art?
Right.
So none of these questions are addressed, answered, or whatever. The next question for me is, what is poetry? What is a poet? What is the moral responsibility of the artist and the poet? I mean, during the Black Arts Movement, there were a lot of poets. A lot of them I have a lot of problems with. Just saying black, I'm black, and I'm proud, I ain't black, that's not a poem. That's just a series of statements. Good, you're black. I mean, what I'm saying? I mean, anybody could, and just to make rhymes. See, that's going back to Basquiat. Childish, infantile graffiti is the equivalent of Buford Delaney. You can't. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, just one more thing. Just one more thing, Al. Just one more quick point. So I think that the album, which I know Jeremiah's listened to a lot of it. I haven't. I read the review. I've read several reviews, being reviewed everywhere, and I think for me the most important questions are not even addressed, because they accept that art has no elevated moral responsibility. And again, I keep going back to King. So there's no sky. what are you saying to children? Okay, let's start with children. I know Mark Lamont Hill at one time was promoting the idea of a hip-hop pedagogy. That the only way you could teach little black kids is through hip-hop. So in other words, not only is the country segregated, but the black mind is so constructed that only hip-hop, you know, well, I mean, we got a Du Bois, we got a Baldwin, we got a lot of people, and it wasn't hip-hop, you know, but see, it's this. I agree. It is a stereotyping, demeaning, and put down of black folk, and saying that there is no way out of this crisis. That in the face of all of this, retreat and find your own truth. Let me let Al come in and then Jerry.
I guess the question is also who is interested in this version of black people and their art. We had talked about Basquiat before, and that was a really, actually I did want to bring it up because I went to this Basquiat exhibition in New York City.
Oh, you're the one that we were having. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was you and I.
That's okay. And it was especially jarring because I had gone to this exhibition after the group of us had gone to Fisk University and seen the murals by Aaron Douglas, in which, you know, with the murals you saw actually an aspiration. You know, there was an aspiration of science, of philosophy, of art, and all of these beautiful things that we were all so inspired by. But even also being on Fisk University's campus, you know, this idea of striving of students and an education for the future. And then shortly thereafter, I went to the Basquiat exhibition, which no one should go to except for as a social experiment. Like, it was completely demeaning of black art and black culture, especially after that experience at Fisk. Because with Basquiat, you have, you know, a so-called artist that's being held as the black artist, and his art is just scribbles. You know, there's this there's one of Miles Davis, and he actually is just a scribble on a canvas.
Is it crayon?
Sorry?
Was it crayon?
Yeah, it looked like it was a crayon drawing. And then there was also this one on Muhammad Ali, you know, these figures that we really look up to. And he was also reduced to scribbles and graffiti. I don't even know if it would be considered graffiti art. But that's so insulting to a tradition that actually has produced great art, to say that this is the art that is of black people. And so I think that contrast of who is promoting this kind of art when there are people like Muhammad Ali, Aaron Douglas, Jacob Lawrence, etc. Like even for Jacob Lawrence, right before the pandemic, there was a Great Migration series at the Whitney Museum in New York City. And through the series, it was a series of like canvases in which it documented the history of black people moving from the South, but also the different struggles that they had faced, whether it's like, you know, getting onto a crowded train station as they were leaving the South, or if it was at the polling booths, or if it was in the classroom. So the question is, why is this? Like, why is someone like Basquiat so emerging in these times as black art? Why is Kendrick Lamar? Oh yeah, I asked Kathy, and Kathy's like, I'm interested in that question too.
Well, I remember one thing I will say. I mean, I feel like you're sort of like laying it pretty well. It's like I feel like, again, like Doc, only in the last few days have I been like, oh, when you say like we need to make sure that children and young people have a sky to aspire to, this is the sort of thing that you like put in, like, you know, just reduce and limit their capacity to imagine. But I remember when we were first looking into pop art, I was still like, you're quite exposed to, you know, comic books or Andy Warhol, and then you had asked the question, is there even a single black artist as part of like pop art? And I feel like the closest we got, and I am starting to think that like Basquiat is this sort of same tendencies but made for black folk, and like in all the ways that, like, you know, he's heralded in the same ways, because like I forget that his life story also like a youth that rose up into such glamorous and iconic and like famous, all these circles, and I think even like Brussels, or even had like a working relationship with like Andy Warhol.
No, Andy Warhol was his
Manager?
promoter.
Oh yeah, but yeah.
He would never have been that without Andy Warhol.
Right.
If,
Right.
if you look into
Hold on, wait a
it,
minute.
Well, it just sounds like one more way that pop art is like recycled, rebranded, and then redistributed as like black art and masquerading as such, and then not only being put out there for young black artists to aspire to, like aspire to the same sort of irreverence and like, you know, tossing or discarding or like, you know, reinterpreting, remixing history or your own culture, and then Basquiat's very compatible with hip hop because of, I feel like, his lifestyle and the way he lived his life, and I feel like he is sort of like the visual equivalent of postmodernism in hip hop, which I think is something we started to like dive into. And then one more thing I was gonna say is that I think one of the other things that maybe we've touched on this before, there's a big shame of all of this, is that I would say even when we talked about how like hip hop is so consumed not only by young black people, but like white kids that grow up in the suburbs, young Asians that grow up in the suburbs. In some ways, when we talk about the segregation of like people, but there's also a way that the ruling elite, even like I feel like I had to learn about Kendrick Lamar or something. I had to like kind of get into like what it meant to like, you know, be a college educated young person and feel woke. And in some ways, they're like trying to group together young college educated like white, black, Asian, Latino, and everything. And like the same thing maybe even goes for like Basquiat or types of art that you're supposed to engage in or feel like after a college education is supposed to predispose you to. And I think it is a shame because you forget, you just don't know, or you just don't realize how much higher the sky can even go because of like the black community. You're supposed to even, you're meant to, you're meant to know, but I guess, or like you're not meant to know, but you once you know, you can go much further, and you realize like what you know, what people, what the university tells you about, black folk is just not true, just not even comes close.
I was just gonna add like one thing. You said the influence it has on America. The thing with art in America also, it has tragic consequences for the rest of the world as well.
Exactly,
That's so true.
Like even with Basquiat, I was telling Emily this morning, it's, I don't know, this is kind of, it was one sample point, but in Taiwan, Basquiat is also being promoted.
Yes, and Japan has like collected so much of Basquiat's work too.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Well, this is not specifically related to Basquiat, but on the subject of art, I also wanted to bring up the album art for the Kendrick Lamar album. Because it's, well, I'll show you, but
it's on the cover.
This is the album. It's a family series.
Where it's like him wearing a crown of thorns, and then he has a gun like tucked into his pants, and then he's holding, I think, his baby. And then I don't know if that's his like actual partner, but then there's like a woman also nursing a baby. And actually, it made me think like a few things, but one of which was that, you know, if the message of the album is that, you know, basically I'm just going to retreat into myself and deal with my inner problems and my trauma and all that stuff, and you know, I just want to be good enough for me. What's interesting is that at the same time, first of all, Kendrick is portraying himself through the artwork as being like not just a father, but a carrier of like the life of future generations. I think symbolically it represents like basically this is what is like my legacy, this is what I'm passing down to future generations. And that is hugely important, but then even more than that, he depicts himself as Jesus, basically. And you can also interpret that several ways, one of which is that maybe he feels like, you know, he's reached the level of Jesus, or that he's being crucified like Jesus, and that he's being put under all these pressures and all that stuff. And that also, you know, you can interpret it as him saying like, you know, I'm seen as very holy, but also I have to have a gun because I'm a black man and I'm violent or something. And
the crown of thorns.
And the crown of thorns, like saying that he's basically like Jesus. But That's like, I think the ironic thing about this, which is I think the whole irony is the pop art influence, which is that he is through the symbolism of the album and how he's portraying himself, the branding that he's going for with this album, like all these photo shoots where he's wearing a crown of thorns, he's very clearly sending a message of like, one, not just equating himself to Jesus, but like, this is like, he takes it seriously. He thinks it's an important message for America, as much as he's saying like, oh, this is just about me.
Yeah.
No, he's saying that this is an important message for all of America and for the world. Yeah. And so that's where it's, yeah, like then like all of these contradictions come up, but it's almost like he loves he loves the irony of it. Yeah, the hypocrisy of it. And that's what he's reveling in that.
What he's considering irony is really hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Go ahead, Derek.
So I was thinking about the American, studying my art forms and studying in my lifetime. The person would say, "Oh, you are primitive," because American primitive, but because you're doing art. I'm not going to use the word spontaneous, but your intuition in my drawings. Like I've never been to art school, but I've been with art students who came to see my work, but I've never been trained by anybody from the art school. But I still approach solidity and lines, a lot of stuff that I've uncovered. But the title of them giving the person the primitive. Yeah. You had to go to Oceania to find where these living forms that the Western civilization suppress all these things in our communities. How we respond to art or our environment and hardcore lifestyle, what that does to the human being that's inspired inside of their nature. But in American teachers would say, oh, people are just primitive, but on the other level, it's a new form of like where people took the word for the Cubist artists and took that and not really say, well, this is not just African art, like just using that as a label. It's something that American artists have done with the horn that no one could do with a horn, and people was inspired. Like myself, you could be inspired by horn players, but I'm a painter with a brush, and I do sculpture too. But for somebody to assign to you the name primitive, you got to really uncover what that means, not just on the positive and the negative level, but what that means when you insinuating that I'm primitive, like we don't have no manners, we don't have.
No, I think with you're unschooled.
Unschooled, but I had to like say, well, I'm self-learned, but I still need people that I learned from. Yeah, so this is an important part of our junction here today to deal with this art.
Isn't Basquiat trying to imitate an unschooled artist? Isn't that?
Yeah, I feel like what Derek is trying to say is like there's times when you will appear to maybe the white gaze or untrained eye to be very childlike or native, but that's the sort of label that's often put on so many black artists or even artists all over the world. Yeah, in general. But then it also you're also saying that there's a tradition or quite a rigorous methodology of approaching the world's different traditions of folk art or the art of people and trying to channel that with or without the training, whatever you got. Yeah. And it's actually quite it's quite a discipline, or it's quite a to make art that means it. But then Basquiat is not even, maybe he is feeling that, but it's not the same. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, but that's why I use the word that they use, crayon, because I have my relationship when I draw with crayon, but I have kept it from kindergarten to first grade, where if I brought working here for you to see what I've done with crayon, that don't mean I just scribbled it like I'm a scribe, but I won't scribble it. I will show you what line has formed and what color, and then crayons could give texture and it could give design just because I'm using it, like I imprinted myself with the crayon. But that's something that's technical. If a person didn't really apprehend that children are learning technical things in designing with crayon, but you told to throw the crayons away when you get 10 or 12. So where mine have maintained me throughout my entire life, so that I might use crayon because it's a technical thing that you're using crayon for. It's like wax, but it's unwaxed. You know what I mean, like that. But this is the embodiment of something that people are trying to suppress us and kill us, So we can't say what we want to do with our daily life every day. To approach our lives, not just as artists, but as an everyday person.
Yeah, but can I just say, if you don't mind, this is very interesting, and the organic, which you're describing, as opposed to the fake. You see,
Yes.
the fake is that you're trying to act like you're the organic artist, when in fact you are a fake of the organic. I'm not saying it well. I'm trying to define something using the word itself, but this gets to a very important thing, because so much of black art could be called, quote, primitive. I know at one point, if you went back to the 30s and 40s, they would consider jazz to be primitive. That is, untrained, unschooled musicians aspiring or acting like, they will always would say, they're acting like they are sophisticated musicians. Well, now we know they weren't just acting like it, they are sophisticated. But the other thing is that the so-called primitive or organic artist is really in conversation, a critical engagement with the art world, with the music world. Yes. You listen to Nina Simone, who was trained at, was it not Moore College, but Curtis. Curtis. It was Curtis. Curtis Musical.
I thought she was denied access to Curtis.
Actually, I think you're right.
Maybe she was.
She was denied acceptance because of her race to Curtis.
Okay, yeah, but she was
classically trained.
She classically, not at Curtis, but she was classically trained, and what she did is to subject to the organic critique of the blues, the quote high art of the classical world. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a dialectical and if you listen to Ellington, certainly if you listen to Train, if you listen to Billie Holiday, I didn't even want to mention Sarah Vaughan, it is the black person who is not trained by the high art, by the official art or music world, but hear them, know what they're doing, study what they're doing, and then enter into a dialectic. And in fact, have pulled off probably one of the great syntheses in philosophical and musical history. But I just wanted to say that. Go ahead, Sarah. No, go ahead. You go.
No, I mean that's what you're pointing out to. Not even just like, I guess it's like in the fine arts zone with painters and photographers or whatever you want to go it like that. But even so, the fake organic artist, that's definitely a trend that started. It's like something that I noticed that I was trying to avoid at some point, because I was just like, well, why is it that when we draw black people that makes us like hit all of a sudden, but like that doesn't get us to the truth about anything. It just shows what people want to see. And there's a lot of different painters who have variations of this today, but it doesn't get to a certain answer that artists struggle for truth.
But this is what Kathy studies. I'm sorry, Kathy. No, she studies pop art.
Right.
She knows pop art.
She does.
And what did Andy Warhol say? That commercial art is art.
Yeah,
okay. Now let's get back to, quote, primitive art. Right. But primitive art is unsophisticated, untrained art. Yeah. But commercial art,
that's good,
designed to sell things, is sophisticated art. Right. Now, but then this gets us to another question that I think somebody raised: deindustrialization. And here's where the U.S. economy, by the way, Zayu, is different than the Chinese economy. In case he didn't know, that's you. My good friend. But hold on, let me make this point.
I'm sorry.
Deindustrialization.
Okay.
70% of the U.S. economy is based upon marketing and buying and selling. The U.S. economy is an economy that produces not just an economic ruling class, but a very parasitic ruling class. And what happens to art when people don't have jobs?
Right.
When people, what happens to music? When they're not coming from Motown. Motown means motored city, where they produce cars and everybody's working in a factory and singing when they get off of work in the basement or on the weekend and perfecting their art. What happens when you don't have that any longer? What does art and music look like? And I think, or what does poetry look like? When the people producing it are no longer anchored to production. And so the artist becomes a hustler, a salesman or saleswoman. I'm trying to find a way, and I have a very good friend that does this. His overriding concern is how to market his art, not how to make art. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, pour the bar. Oh, I'm sorry. Huh?
No, just a ask after her.
Oh, you after?
You're going right.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, pour the bar, and then Johan.
I was just, I wanted to talk a little bit about the article itself, which reviews the thing. I found it very confusing, I must say, because I'm not used to reading something that's supposed to give people an idea or a summary or the essence of something that you're writing about in such confusing terms where you just you're assaulted by words.
Oh, you're not very familiar with the American intellectual landscape.
I'm learning now.
Or the New York Times.
Yeah, and it's just like,
Have you ever taken a course in the social sciences or see you did science. That's all. This is what you. Well, Jerry can tell you this because he majored in English, but that's why he can understand it so well. I'm sorry.
No, I mean I found this conversation we had around it very clarifying because I'm going to have to learn how to read these articles better because I was confused because there were so many parts where you had clearly negative things being said, but I've never seen negative things being used to elevate something.
Oh yeah.
This is just such a. It's a concept I'm not down with. And
postmodern logic.
Basically saying that truth can be fragmented into parts, some of which are ugly, some of which are beautiful. But all in all, when you put the pieces together, it's some imperfect thing. But that's not the version of truth that I'm ready to believe in. And also, I like what Emily said. That was very clarifying. It seems like the review aside, what this album goes for is the idea. Wow. The idea of it is to diminish human potential, like what you aim towards, right? What we've been talking about. But yeah, this review is like it's a word jumble, which is not meant to clarify anything. Might as well not have been written.
So interesting.
But I see now that it will go ahead and make this more interesting to people and give it a bigger viewership. But then I also was interested by the choice of word which Emily pointed out, that he's looking in the mirror to retreat. And it reminded me of this conversation we had at the Azadi Reading Collective about, the mirror that Black America holds up to the Indian struggle and vice versa. And I was just thinking that, we are talking about the same words, but coming from such different perspectives. I mean, this mirror that they're talking about, he's looking at is basically, narcissism.
That's right.
Just looking at yourself, but you don't see in the mirror everything that came before you that produced you. and don't see what the role you are supposed to play in the future because of that history and that past. The other thing I'm always curious about this is how do they pick these people? Like, how do you pick people like Kendrick Lamar, and how do you pick people like yeah, how do you I don't even know how to pronounce that.
Let's get back to this. This is very, very important because they are chosen.
They are chosen.
And who? What are the criteria of making the choice, and who makes that choice? Let's come back to that because it is not coming from the people that they claim to represent. Okay, but let me call on Joe.
Yeah, well, I had a question because it was interesting what you were saying, tying rap and hip hop to deindustrialization.
Oh yes.
Because like one of the main defenses of hip hop from like the progressives or left thinkers is that they argue like, okay, this is the music of deindustrialization. So there would be like like especially the more like conscious rappers like Public Enemy and stuff, they would be like, or even I guess like Tupac or Biggie, they would be like, these guys represent that generation growing up, in the aftermath of the defeat of these struggles, the aftermath of, during deindustrialization, and their rapping is representing that reality of not having opportunities and violence and drugs. And I think someone was telling me that, I think there's like I haven't watched it, but someone was telling me there's like a documentary or something called Vanguard of the Rubble. Because some of the early rappers were like, oh, like, we're the vanguard of the rubble, like, yo, it's like, I don't know, the Panthers and all that is done, and we're coming out of that. So anyway, I was just wondering how you would see that and respond to that in relation to what because you're also saying it's coming out, obviously it's coming out of that chronological period and those social conditions.
Yes.
But you don't see it necessarily as a representative or like a conscious response to them. You know what I mean?
No, I don't think. I think the whole postmodernist movement is an acceptance of the inevitability of deindustrialization and the impoverishment of the working class, and that it gets translated in hip hop and other forms of youth culture, including sports, as making it, getting to the top. Like you look at some of the commercials that LeBron James is in these days. If he doesn't see it as demeaning, it's because he doesn't understand the nature of the game that he's in. But
child labor.
It is a, first of all, the consignment of black people and black men in particular who make it pretty much to sports and, quote, music, which means that they are commodities.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, celebrity is a commodity, guys.
Yeah. But the privileging of hustling, of the hustler, of the, the hustler. The hustlers, hustler is a person, well, back in the days that didn't want to work, but want to hustle the working class.
That puts it into context. That
that
term is from the earlier period.
People
had the opportunity.
A hustler. A hustler, for instance, hustlers would stay home all day and wait for the working people to come home and try to beat them out of their money. Right. I'm not making that up.
Right.
Or a pimp is a hustler of women. Right. And so pimping and hustling, if you remember, y'all guys go back in hip hop, the pimp and the hustler were iconic and romanticized figures. Within hip hop. The blaxploitation movies, which were protested against in the 70s when they came out, and there are blaxploitation film stars and movie producers who never forgave the movement for protesting against them. Under normal conditions of struggle, hip-hop would have been protested against. There's no reason somebody with that excuse my line, bitches and hoes thing. That was still, how many children heard that? And it was always excused, well, he's not talking about me. Well, how do you know who he's talking about?
Exactly.
One thing you know, he's not talking about no white woman, because that record wouldn't have been made. Let's keep it real. So you're talking about black women. How did that become so ubiquitous? How did that happen? And therefore, I make the argument, and I can't get away from this. Person come to me, well, hip hop this, and well, you don't know the real hip hop, and did you hear the Roots, or did you hear Kendrick Lamar? I'm saying, well, what I want to hear from them, I've never heard. A full-throated attack upon black people. That's what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear a full-throated attack upon the romanticization of murder and thuggery. Where the fuck did that come from? Never a word. Like, oh, they were talking about their reality. No, they weren't. Most of them were performers, acting out. So it gets to the point of who chose this and who promoted this. It is obviously the ruling class who knew that a black proletariat without jobs is a black proletariat who would resist.
Right.
So what you give them ideologically, you feed them ideologically over 2.5 generations. This is what makes this so difficult. It's not just 2.5 generations. And then you make it into a religion. Criticize hip hop? Oh, you're criticizing my being. You're criticizing my gods. That's why Kendrick trying to be every man after he was made to be a prophet. You know? You see how that, it's all, it is all intentional. That's why the ideological struggle must draw red lines. What side are you on? And so you criticize hip hop, you lost a young friend. You know? You don't feel that Kendrick Lamar is a genius? Well, you know, don't come to our Malcolm X event. No, serious, which was a hip hop event, but I was happy to see that didn't too many people turn up anyway. You know, I mean, so you get this. See, and then it's I'm telling you, it is I'm always asking myself. Me and Catherine are always asking this. Where are black young people? I asked Serafina, I asked Derek. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. One thing we do know is that they've been ideologically neutralized. Ideologically neutralized. Look, back in my days, if there were a group of people getting together to discuss Du Bois and Marx, ain't no way in the world you can keep me out of it. And all my friends. You know? What about all these black students at Temple? Why aren't you here?
Yeah.
Shoot, why aren't you just trying to, well, Doc, what you doing over there? You don't want to know what Doc is doing. Because you're ideologically neutralized and you have accepted not just, and I put quotes around this, not just an art form, but a belief system. A dogma.
Yep.
And you're calling art, which at best is mediocrity.
Yep.
Just like Andy Warhol, come on, dog. You ain't did nothing great. You don't function like any of the great artists. You know what I'm saying? So you take the great musical heritage and all you can do is sample it for your own purposes, which is all about you. You know, it is a total scam, a total hustle, but only in an economy where there's been complete deindustrialization. Black communities, as you see, have been ruined, and men and women broken on the wheel of life, and children not given the opportunity to be educated.
Yes.
Families broken, and see, this is why Joe Biden, when it comes to the great moral questions of our time, I ain't running to you, anybody but you. Because you were in the forefront along with Hillary and Bill Clinton and bums with the criminal justice system. Do you know what it means? Well, first you have deindustrialization, and 1/4, at least, of all young black men are in jail. 1/4. No two-family income homes, no maritable men for women, and they weren't just given short, they were given long prison terms. Joe Biden, that's you, dog. You. You see, this is the magnitude of what we're dealing with. That is why ideas without a moral foundation are not enough. The greatest ideas, of course we're studying Hegel, we're studying Marx, we do the whole nine, but without some moral foundation driving, that shit don't mean nothing.
Nope.
We can go over to the University of Pennsylvania and sit in a class of a quote Marxist professor and hear that, and he can probably quote Marx better than anybody in this room will ever be able to do. That's another thing I just want to say. Book worship. It was a form, Lenin talked about book worship. People who worship the text so much that they literally memorize it.
Yeah.
But what about people who don't read books, but they can have worship, another kind of worship of their, quote, heroes that are explaining their trauma. Let me just, I'm gonna end this. Black people don't talk like that.
Nope.
We don't talk. I mean, it's like, let's, you hit me, you push me, I'm gonna push back. We're not that kind of, like this Kendrick, come on, man, who are you trying to impress? That's not the way we act. That's not in the DNA of the black struggle. It's always been Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. We're gonna speak out. That's our job. We have to speak out for the people. And so it's a very, I would say, it is very difficult because it's not like Motown in a little house producing great music, grounded in the black community of Motor City, of Detroit. It's not coming from the bottom. Now it's chosen for us. And to make sure you give the proper authority to those that we have chosen, we're going to give them a Grammy Award, a MacArthur Genius Award. We're going to make them, and they would never do that unless they were in crisis. They wouldn't do it unless this was a profound crisis.
Just two things that popped up into my mind was when I was in Philadelphia Student Union.
Yes.
There's like a nonprofit like in high schools and stuff. I got into it somehow. I think I just knew people and I started going. Yeah. And then I don't know, have you heard of it before? You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So there's an initiative that they wanted to do, which was make an album, which actually I think it was because somebody in the organization was like a, rapper or whatever like that. And I know the model that they want to do. Okay, so they're in the neighborhood of West Philadelphia, basically on 52nd Street and something, I forget. It's closer. I forget. Anyway, so, and you know, you want to make art and stuff within the community and all that kind of thing. And then I guess they didn't end up making an album. So I was just thinking about that as apropos to the conversation about how is art actually developed within people's lives, and within young people's lives. Because the question that I'm having is like, okay, well, I know that, well, like, how can art actually organically arise today? Because one, people need ideas, but how?
But
you know, when things like
that's a great question. What is the process by which art is created, by which artists emerge?
To follow that line, now I'm gonna say what else I was thinking about. You know, it was important that people had jobs, and that gave stabilization in their lives, you know, in the daily life. But since that's not the situation now, I can still imagine that if people had ideas, they could still make art.
Oh yes.
So,
But see, there has to be a sky.
yeah. No, so it's not
There
just
has
like,
to be something to strive towards.
Exactly.
And art must be clearly understood.
Exactly.
You know, and not.
At a basic-
Oh God, I'm sorry.
Because one of the things that, you know, for the 10th anniversary, I guess we're kind of working out is this question that we're talking about now, about culture and whatnot. And, you know, we're kind of like on, some of us are like on an assignment to kind of make like a logo. A little bit, we're thinking about it, just trying to think about it. And so some of us have read the Criteria of Negro Art recently, and you know, so in the essay, Du Bois writes that, well, the, you know, churches and so on, that kind of thing, are beautiful in the fact that they are made beautifully, but he stands by the fact that he thinks beauty is inseparable from the truth, and that beauty stems from the truth. So it's like not even in the sense of surface level aesthetics, but the fact that something that is true is beautiful, and that's a different reality of thinking. So we were thinking about that as we think about how free school thinks about art and whatnot. But another thing that came up in my head as to the conversation of hip hop and such goes, I've had a lot of conversations with men about hip hop and, you know, why they are inspired by hip hop, why they think it's important. But I haven't had a lot of conversations with women about hip hop, and that's only because I don't have a lot of women friends.
Yes.
And that's me. That's a me thing. But what is interesting though is that now you have like all these women who are artists who are also hustlers and selling off their everything. Nicki Minaj. There's like so many people who emerge out of that kind of phase of women rapping and things like that. But I know that when black men, when I was first introduced to Kendrick Lamar, I was in earlier stages with Kendrick Lamar's, you know, Pimp a Butterfly and stuff like that.
Right.
So I guess he was closer to like, I'm not gonna vote for
It's
Obama.
interesting to pimp.
Yes.
Pimp.
Yes.
A butterfly.
Yeah.
The word pimp. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
True.
Yeah.
It's always there.
It's
Sure.
always.
But it's supposed to be like ironic.
Yeah.
Of course.
They're
But it's
pimping out,
hypocritical at
yeah.
the end of the day.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
I supposed to be.
Right.
And the album covers.
And it doesn't.
Yes.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying. We don't compromise on those things.
No
But
question.
it's like the thing that always comes up is that people want to say that I relate to the daily, you know, the things that the rapper is supposedly saying
Right.
about life and so on.
Absolutely.
But similar to the conversation about the inorganic artists, aka Basquiat, or those who want to be artists to show black life in their realest sense of the word, you know, and not. What happens is that you don't elevate at all, or even understand the humanity in black people. You just want to kind of just lock it to the box of, since I have the skin that is black, and thus I am, you know, dehumanized anyway. And I, you know, it's just like different boxes that artists go into, and I just don't understand why they don't see that. But yeah, I just wanted to mention those two things. But it's too much. I guess I wasn't.
It's so very interesting. Sorry, Joe, you come to this? Oh, God, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about like the moral foundations
Mhm.
for art. I think one thing we would talk about is the necessity for the child, for the immortal child, for making something that they can see, and like you're talking about, like see the stars, see the sky. And artists now are basically with the idea of, well, I'm just representing me, and no one needs to take what I'm saying. I'm not needing to be held responsible for this. And it actually makes me think of this essay we're reading in our reading group, the Nothing Personal, James Baldwin. He says, and this is a different way to take youth. He says the eternal youth is a synonym for corruption.
Yeah, you
And
say that.
and what I get from that isn't that obviously different ideas, but to pretend that you can be a child forever,
Right.
and to just
Right, that
acquiesce
you don't
in
take
its emotions.
responsibility.
Right. And if you feel that way, then of course you're not going to be responsible to another child because you're just a child yourself. But also this question of whose art. We keep saying what is art, and I feel like that plays into it a little bit too much to me, because really the question comes down to whose art, who wants to represent the millionaire as an everyday man. Who really wants us to believe that's what every day is like, to have that mindset, that mentality of people as statistics, I don't know, it's just, there's a lack of, a community built around children, a society, a civilization. This isn't the thing we're talking about. It's just, how do I get to where I need to get to get,
That's a killing instinct.
But the object of admiration is the millionaire.
Yeah.
It is not, and I get this from you, Jeremiah, when you talk about, first of all, the portrayal of black life is usually or generally very stereotypical. Even the artist or the rapper himself or herself portrays herself stereotypically. And they will say, well, that's not me. That's just me acting, the persona I take on. Now, I don't know, I think maybe there were some that were more authentic about who they were, but I think, and I don't know everybody. See, this is, it's so varied, but now Kendrick has risen to the top. And so then you ask the question, what about Tupac, what about Biggie Smalls, what about Public Enemy, let us say, and was old school original hip hop, the real hip hop, and what we have now is a poor imitation. Well, we don't fully know. I don't fully, if you know, I would be very happy. Anybody, because
But
it
could
is.
hip hop have gone in a different direction?
Yeah. Everybody will say, if you say, I don't dig hip hop. Well, you don't know the original, the old school hip hop. You ever hear that argument?
Yeah.
I get that all. Now I have to, in all transparency, I have to say I made a hip hop record.
Right.
Single.
Single, one single, not an album.
You have a record out there.
And the people that made it, they won't, they're holding it. But it's called Good Morning Revolution.
Oh wait,
Take one out. But I was being more like Gil Scott or the last poet. It's very different. It's very different. But I'm just, maybe we could get a report from the Azadi reading group.
Yeah. Chambarka, you want
Hey, listen, Lou and Zayu, if you guys want to, come on in, please do. It'd be so good to hear from you. I was wondering while we're talking, since we have people who are Chinese citizens, how does all of this, what goes on in this society, resonate with you all? I mean, if you want to reveal it, you know. Go ahead, Zayo.
No, that's a very good question because I feel like I always joked about it with Lou because I always like I feel more American than anything.
That's very interesting, man.
Yes. So
what, after 3 years?
How many years?
Almost 5 years.
Wow. That's a good amount of years.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Wow.
Well, and also just because I'm definitely not a representative sample, right?
Okay.
I'm more on the so I spoke. Yeah, I'm interested in American history, Marxism, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
So that's why yeah, of course, there's great potential in America if we were to achieve socialism, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not very familiar with the pop culture we were talking about, so I can't quite comment on that. But basically, yeah, the recent events, the Buffalo shooting, which was quite tragic, I did not really follow, but I think what was being discussed makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, even though I don't know much about the artists that you guys mentioned, but I think I see some similarities in terms of like how the representation probably felt like to create or reinforce a certain stereotype, or like how people should act or present certain aspects of a group to the larger audience and saying that, yeah, that's how we should access the life of those groups of people. I certainly see that, even though Chinese is like not like so racially diverse, but like ethnically they're like 56 ethnic groups. So certain times we see like, yeah, how like a Han Chinese director tried to portray a certain Tibetan groups, like how they act or so, and then create certain stereotypes around that, even though a Tibetan director portrays people in a very different way. So those how we distinguish people are more of like man-made thing and created and reinforced through like music and movies, and so rather than like naturally how people are like acting or behaving.
You know, I'm always, I mean, for myself, that's the reason I ask, because I'm always interested in that mirror. You know, how it comes across. And I can understand when you say you can, I understood in a very empathetic way what you were saying. I'm more American than I am Chinese these days. You know, and I took that to be that to understand this society and this culture, it couldn't be from a distance, it had to be more close up. Yeah, I understand, and that's very, very important. But I would argue this point, that, and this I talked to Purba and Chibarta, when we talk about India and Afro-America, in ways that I am not able to explain, America is more Afro-American than it is white. And I would say, I would agree with you in becoming American, but I would say become American in the right way. You understand? I mean, because I think what you're saying, to know it is you have to be it in a lot of ways. And I'm interested, you know, in like Tibetans and Han Chinese, etc. And I'm certain that there are all kinds of stereotypes of minority groups in China. Lou, with one great distinction, they were never made chattel slaves.
Yeah.
See, that is such a game changer, you know. And so all of this flowering of the human soul, the human spirit, comes out of this great struggle against slavery and for democracy. And that's where Du Bois and all these black thinkers, far surpass any of the other American thinkers, and I would say are elevated to the level of world historic thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So I would, you dig where I'm coming, and that's why this ideological struggle with art and pop art and commodification of art and all of that is so important, because we want to hold on to what is great that comes out of resistance. It's a hell of a thing these days.
Yeah, I'll just add that
Okay.
last week we in Platypus discussed Chris Cruchon's article on the dictatorship of the proletariat, along with the first chapter of Black Reconstruction.
He's a Christian.
I'm sorry?
No, the founder of Platypus.
And tomorrow we are doing the second chapter.
The white worker.
The
Yeah.
White worker?
Yeah.
After dinner.
And
So,
if I could say one, because there was an article, Danny posted it. Somebody, he could be a person in Platypus who wrote an article of something to the effect of, does the working class still exist? Did anybody see that article?
Really? No, I didn't see it.
Yeah, but I read part of it, and I was saying, well, you can never answer that question if you don't see the black worker.
Right.
And and I was just thinking, the black working class looks more like the 19th and 20th century proletariat. In the conditions of his life, the ghettoization, the homelessness, the poverty wages, looks more like the 19th century proletariat that Engels or Marx would talk about than any other part of the working class in this society. And in many ways is more like, the work. That's why we just almost naturally gravitate towards India. Black folk in our movements, we gravitate towards China. We're rooting for China over the United States all the time. Really, when they go to the Nation of Islam, all these these Koreans and Chinese go to the Nation of Islam and they open their arms warmly. Welcome our Asiatic black brothers and sisters. Because we've always had that tendency to look to the groups that the U.S. saw as would try to marginalize and put down, and say there are people too. They're like us. So I just want to say that. Could you just want to say something about Azadi?
Yeah, so as most of you know, the Azadi Reading Collective, it met for its first session this Thursday, and it's going to continue for the next several weeks and months as a part of the year of the Indian freedom struggle to commemorate 75 years of Indian independence. And I think we had a good conversation to begin the first session, and we hope it continues over the year, the next few months. So primarily we had a discussion about the significance of the Indian freedom struggle, its historical significance, and the chief method that it furnished. And it really was a new method in the history of revolutionary movements in the world. And its significance because it really connected, it was the first anti-colonial movement that inspired several anti-colonial movements in Asia and Africa, and also the most important connection to the Black freedom struggle and the civil rights movement. So we also had a conversation about how to understand the non-violent movement today, because there is a tendency, as I think we were also talking about before at some point today, about how non-violence movement it's almost co-opted to mean something that it was not. It's co-opted on the one hand to mean that it's a spiritual endeavor which has nothing to do with hard realities of the time, and also this other understanding of non-violence simply as an absence of violence. So we had a conversation that attempted to clarify what non-violent resistance of the early 20th century in India really meant. And it was not simply an absence of violence, which has been portrayed by several other times in history, which usually came after brutal repression, by the British Empire and so on. And also, I think in the course of the year and even in the last conversation, we had to come across this question about the attacks on Gandhi and on the Indian freedom struggle, which has been rampant from all sections of academia and the ruling class all over the world, in the US and in some places in Africa, and of course also in India. And I think we came to the conclusion in the conversation that the answer to these critics can really be found in the fact that the civil rights movement was to a big extent inspired by the method that Gandhi came up with. And we also had a discussion about how we see revolutionary movements, because there is a constant feeling in India among mostly people aspiring to be part of the ruling class in some sense, that the Indian state is an example of a failure, or it's on its way to a failure. And I think in order to understand the implications and the assumptions behind the question, we have to come to understand how one sees failure of revolutionary movements in the first place, and also whose lens are we seeing it through. So this, I'm thinking of what Purva was saying before about going back to Baldwin, because I think Baldwin had a deep understanding of the white man, and the reason that all of this is necessary at this point today is because an understanding of the West is really missing, because at a time when the West is really, it's penetrated really everywhere in the world. So these questions about understanding the West is important in order to understand the significance of anti-colonial movements of the past, to understand the relevance for today's times. And also this question of seeing revolutionary movements as failed, or thinking about them in terms of their completeness, because we have to ask ourselves our role in it when we think about it as an incomplete movement, as opposed to thinking of it as a failure which absolves us of our responsibility. And so we hope that this conversation will go on over the next few weeks. Others can also add to
Right. What I was most heartened by was that there were a few people I didn't know. There were new faces, and from the young people who came, it seemed we're getting the sense that this is a timely conversation to start. People are really looking for something to anchor them that will help to understand this sort of illogical, violent society we are being forced to live in. And also people are frankly tired of being ashamed of their history and heritage. And instinctively they feel like what they're being asked to believe is just not the truth. So that was something that we had a lot of new people join us.
Yes.
And also everybody also shared their sort of personal interaction as South Asians in America, what their interactions with South Asia has been like, the lens through which, like Shambhato was saying, it's always through the lens of the ruling class here, but when you remove these assumptions where you start from, and you start fresh and try and look at the world from the perspective that we are talking about, which King was talking about, then it's a whole different, and you sort of find it easier to come to the truth. I guess that's just what I would like to add to what Shambhato was saying.
Yeah, it was a great first meeting. A lot of rich discussion. A lot of things were described. We also had a good discussion about comparing Chinese revolution and Chinese history with the Indian anti-colonial struggle. And of course, we talked a lot about just history generally, the history of the region, how this applies to the civil rights movement and our time. And it was great. And we had people also on Zoom from different parts of the U.S. and so
It was a magnificent organizing effort. It really was. And there were about 20 people, close to 20. I
yeah, if
think.
you count the Zoom people.
Yeah, with the Zoom people and the people in the room.
Yeah.
And I think the prime audience of young Indians, young South Asians in fact, was achieved. So I thought it was a great
But not just South Asians, it's open to everybody.
Yeah, not just the South Asians.
Yeah, we had all kinds.
Yeah. But this discussion is so vital among South Asians because, I'm learning so much just being in this in Azadi and around you all. What does it mean to rob a generation of its identity?
Yeah.
Under the guise of making it in a collapsing capitalist economy. I mean, the cost to the Indian is too great. Too much will be lost. And so Purba and I were talking, as Michael's already said this, and we just gotta go in hard. No compromise on Gandhi. No, well, he may have, and oh, well, that might be. No, none of it's true. And we have to, by the way, I guess one of the things we're going to have to do is study more closely and more carefully his biography, and not the Western biographers, be they white or Indian, but written in Hindi, that are published in India, because this evisceration and so on of Gandhi for the sake of saying that the Indian anti-colonial struggle, as you said, was a failure, because Gandhi was a morally hypocritical human being. They try to do the same with King.
Yeah.
So let's, I just, it's so great to have been a part of that. And the first meeting was the reading of the call, the vision statement, which is almost a perfect document, I feel.
Oh, also you should say about the Urbana-Champaign.
Right, so
associated.
there's also a chapter of the reading collective in Urbana-Champaign
Oh,
that our friend Shantanu and Neha they started last Sunday, and they had Urbana-Champaign is a lot like it's not as easy as in Philadelphia to have these conversations.
Yes.
It's more of a bubble. It's an extreme bubble, I would say, because it's a small college town. But they did have somebody show up virtually, and they had a discussion about the mission statement, and I would think it went well, even though there were ideological differences that came up regarding the very same things you're saying, Doc, right now about Gandhi and his just these really narrow character assessments that somehow become the ideological block that you can't cross and look at the broader thing. Even the character sort of attacks are just untrue, but
absolutely manufactured.
Yeah, but so those are
and
like
a distortion of the nobility of his life, the heroism of his life.
Right, and the message that we have to carry with us.
Yes. Yes.
More than of course the person, but the message that we have to,
Purba Chant, Shambharta, excuse me. But if you go back and look at the 100th anniversary of Gandhi's birth, I guess that was in 1970 something. The whole world celebrated him, the UN, this beautiful thing. The 150th, nobody hardly. He had come under such attack and so on. So it's...
And the other thing, Shambharta was talking about this a little bit, but I just wanted to go back to it, is that the reason this thing that 100th anniversary of this grand celebration with 150th, you're close to nothing. I mean, this precisely shows how afraid the ruling class is of this philosophy and this tradition of struggle. So I mean, we also had this question about how non-violence is often viewed as, you know, as something weak, as, you know, the ruling class viewing non-violent resistance as something that they don't have to worry about too much because there are not such high stakes in that circumstance, but it is actually the opposite. It's what the ruling class fears.
It is so obvious that Gandhi was saying that there are two sides of this at least. There's the anti-colonial struggle, the struggle against British colonialism, but then there is the struggle of India to transform itself. You know, that King was saying the same damn thing. It's not just a protest movement, it's a self-transformative movement.
This killing and assassinating his characteristics, and you know, all of us don't grow under all of these principles till we start digesting them. But it's hard for that kind of salt that for me to understand to go into a wound, and the wound is starting to be healed, but they don't realize where his place was in his life as a Muhammad. You know, he had a title that's come from the people, that he's someone that is part of the soul of the nations. He's not just the soul of India. No, it's the soul of us as a nation, like that single garment thing you had for him. But to misportray his inner person coming to the front from where he came from, didn't start out this mission as who he was. He transformed in the mission and became who he was to the whole world. But to go back and attack him, in essence, I'm reading about Washington, so you got to start saying, well, I'm going to attack all the principles, but the principles, they exist no matter what color you are or where you stand. It's calling something in you as your person, because that's why it's so fearful for people to admit what they don't know, and then they're ashamed to say, why would you say that about Gandhi, but they don't really have the history of the movement inside of them, and they haven't digested what it is for somebody to transcend and say something that it not only alarmed America, it pushed the alarm on the whole world to stand up as human beings again.
Right, and you know, just a small thing. I think we're going to have to take head on this claim that he was a casteist and he upheld untouchability. We're going to have to go
just the opposite. I mean,
yes,
to actually spend the time to read him.
Yeah, but we're going to have to make that argument, make it hard and consistent, because this is a way of, just like they try to say King was a misogynist and just every, you know, they go even further with Gandhi, but we have to take it head on. Oh God, I'm sorry, John. Go ahead, Claude.
I also wanted to say that we really, just a short last comment is that we really should, I mean, through this reading collective, we should really work on making a syllabus. For you know, something as important as liberation itself and truth itself. Simply because you have like 10,000 courses which are teaching, claiming to teach this history and this both in America, both in India. But I mean, you know, they have syllabi and it's all crap. That's true. We have to have a syllabus.
When you teach a course, they tell you nowadays just Google the syllabus. Get the syllabus. Don't spend time more than 15 minutes. So you get one of these.
Yeah. It's almost that time we should go, but did you want to mention something about the 10th anniversary, or is it the next one?
Do you all want to say anything? We're meeting.
Yeah, we have been meeting since January, March, April, May. It's May now. February, maybe? February?
I think more like April. I don't know. We started meeting.
Yeah. Anyway. Yes. So I guess we're still planning the 10th anniversary for the free school, which has come to hit a lot of questions. One of Well, it's like we're trying to encompass all of which free school has done and what it is now. And we're trying to say that the free school not only almost I want to say functions as an institution because, you know, we're doing the 10th anniversary of a group of people who've been meeting at the Church of the Advocate. So I just want to say it like that. So we've been discussing a lot of different ways to formulate the questions that we consider at the free school, that of being art, revolutionary science. Why do we study who we study as central figures like W.B. Du Bois, James Baldwin, and Martin Luther King? We talked about this a lot today. The moral foundations of free school and things like that, the philosophy and why is that important. Political education, and also how is that the basis of any revolutionary kind of situation, and how is free school also initiating that. Those topics are basically what we've been discussing at our meetings that we've had on Sundays.
Well, go ahead. Let Emily, and then I was going to say something.
Well, the only thing I wanted to add is I think the encompassing theme of the conversations and what we're hoping to assert the 10th anniversary and encompass is the question of what is the scientific method of revolutionary process that the free school has developed for 10 years. And then, like Seraphine is saying, how does it help us both identify, understand, but then solve the primary questions of today? Which is, at its deepest level, also a crisis of knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's the title, Knowledge of the Whole Thing, Knowledge and the Revolutionary Spirit of Our Time. And it's going to be 2 weekends, the last weekend in September and the first weekend in October, because we felt we had to have it like that because there's so much. And along with the questions that they have mentioned, we were talking about panels or discussions on the pedagogy of the education of children and youth, political education of children and youth. And we want to emphasize youth and children because the attack is so targeted on them. Like Emily mentioned, the science of the revolutionary process in the United States, and a way for us to take the early scientific expressions of the revolutionary process and how Du Bois and Baldwin and King and others extended and deepened it to make it fit the U.S. history. So all of that, we've been talking about multiple venues, including the Asian Arts Initiative, Church of Crucifixion, Church of the Advocate, the Free Central Branch of the Free Library, and
the concert kind of aspects.
You mean the cultural? Oh yeah, we're working on that to make it intercivilizational, and to go back to more traditional culture that imbibes the culture of resistance. So if we can pull it off, and we're working hard, it can be a contribution to our people, that is our people, the whole people, in the movement forward. And again, we start from the assumption of let's give the working class the greatest opportunity. We're not here to put the working people down. No, not at all. So that's it.
Can I read some last Facebook?
Oh
yeah. There's a rich discussion happening in the comments, or there was at a certain point, but I'm not going to read all of it. Just some highlights. So Cornelius Lockett says, the struggle for abortion rights appears disruptive and I see this issue making this nation essentially an un-United States, so dividing the country. Then Daryl Wasteland Mitchell says, the new front of struggle cutting across old ideological trends is anti-war, pro-abortion, and pro-woman issues. Transgender ideology is objectively fascist in my view. It is telling that Kissinger is, quote, to the left of jail Jamal Joe Biden. New world relations are present today, vote communist. Daryl Wasteland Mitchell. Cornelius Lockett said, in response to the transgender sentence, said, well, we all have a view. The issue is whether that view can be articulated. Danny says, capitalism makes people superfluous, so the replacement theory at least seems to make sense to some people, even if it is a misrecognition, a necessary one. But this is why leadership is so important. And Cornelius says, yes, as the brother said, Biden is quoted as applauding the browning of America. Of course, some whites will react negatively to that. Your point about leadership needs to be elaborated. Jeremiah's point about the assumption that the country will become more Democratic Party leaning is spot on and adopted by much of the left. And then taking a different turn, Nathan Braza says, I never realized how much violence or the thought of violence pervades every aspect of life in this society. Going down to the south and meeting the beautiful, trusting people of the Delta shocked me because I came cautious and on guard. I couldn't understand why they were so loving and trustful of us. I think the spirit of the freedom movement and the reckoning of history and how to live with people of another race is something that the North hasn't fully had. We definitely need the spirit of King again in the North and South to be revived, for the spirit of peace and brotherhood at home and abroad. And then he ends by saying that the people in the South and the Delta disarmed me with their love. And then Stephen Palmiere contributes to the conversation about culture by adding on to what we were saying about Kendrick is a proletarian superhero who is untethered to any class consciousness. And then he says that art means channeling truth to dispel myth. And then he says that Kendrick, I think he's saying that Kendrick is a put down of class consciousness. And then he also mentions the Great Migration. And he says that the Great Migration by Jacob Lawrence channels truth by holding struggle as a class interest-oriented activity. It dispels the myth of the impotent masses, migration being a powerful tactic for class struggle. And then he says it goes down to authentic versus artifice. Primitive translates to immature pejoratively when they assign that label to black artists. And then I think that's all the comments.
That's nice.
Well, next week we are definitely going to start with the introduction to the science of life.
Too much happening in the world.
Yeah, the world is forcing us to engage in that.
It wasn't for capitalism constraints.
Who was that?
I thought that we would like keep locked down by the heat, but really struggle for the ideas.
I've never seen you so dressed up. Stand over there. This is so lovely. Yeah.
I got something
Is it 20 more?
No, I don't think so. I had no clue.